acknowledge your generosity. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome you out to our City Council meeting this evening. We appreciate all of you in attendance. We will begin our meeting tonight with an opening that will be provided by Councilmember Larry Page, after which Councilmember Chris Snell will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful this day to be here in this meeting, to be able to discuss those things which are important to the citizens of Kaysville. We're thankful for the blessings and thy goodness to this great city. We're thankful for the wonderful opportunity we had to meet together on the 4th of July to celebrate the birthday of our great nation. We're so desirous that thy Spirit could be with us this night, that we'll be able to have a discussion that is not only civil but also enlightening and be able to make some good decisions. We appreciate all the many things and blessings we receive from thee, and we pray for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Will the audience please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you, Councilmember Page and Councilmember Snell, for participating in our opening. We'll begin with introductions. My name is Steve Hyatt, and I serve as the mayor of Kaysville City.
Jake Garn, City Council.
Dave Adams.
Susan Lee, City Council.
Chris Snell, City Council.
Larry Page, City Council.
Shane Scott, City Manager.
Maria Devereaux, City Recorder.
Andy Thompson, Engineer.
Lyle Gibson, Zoning Administrator.
Thank you. The next item we have on our agenda is Business Spotlight. I'll turn the time to representatives that we have with us tonight from Gibbs Smith Education.
My name is Avery Pence-Hyder. I work for Gibbs Smith.
Hi everyone, my name is Reed Thompson. Me and my colleague here, Avery, are co-chair members of Gibbs Smith's B Corp committee. And kind of what we wanted to come and talk to everybody here about the City of Kaysville is a little bit about our company, since we're just over in your business park, and also what we're doing being an employee-owned company and a benefit corporation, and to kind of help inspire others to kind of follow in our footsteps and let you know all about what we do. So first, just kind of a little bit of background. Gibbs Smith was started in 1969, and we've been located in Utah. We do some art books and design books, cookbooks, children's books, like Baby Lit might be a series that you're aware of, or we have a LeConte Stewart art book. And then also we have an education arm, which both Avery and I work for, that publishes social studies, state-specific social studies for 32 different states. So we're just kind of here today to talk to you about being an ESOP and what that means, and also being a benefit corporation.
So a couple of years ago, the management team of our company decided that they wanted to be an employee-owned company. So they changed our bylaws and they changed the way that we file, and we are now 50% employee-owned and 50% owned by our founder, Gibbs Smith. And on top of that, we also formed a B Corp. So what that is it's just a slightly different designation from a C corporation, but instead now you're a B corporation. The state of Utah allowed people to start registering that way just a couple of years ago, and so we were the first in Davis County to register as a benefit corporation. What that means essentially is that we have not only a requirement that we maximize profits, but also that we extend some sort of benefit to the community, both in a general and a specific way. This year we have reduced our carbon footprint. We've reduced our carbon footprint by at least 60,000 kilowatt hours. We've made donations to local organizations such as the Animal Shelter in Layton, the Bird Refuge up in Cache County. We've held food drives, we've held Sub for Santa drives, and we've sort of been seeking ways and other ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint and our environmental impact through printing and energy consumption, such as LED lights and things like that. So most of our changes have been over in the business park at our DC, our distribution center, which is in your backyard. It's a little harder to change our barn, which is up in Layton, but we've seen some big impacts in Kaysville, which is great. So.
Last thing that we'd like to mention is we're also kind of looking for ways that we can get our community, meaning our employee community, involved in the community that we work in and many of us live in. Some of those things that we've been doing as organizing volunteer events. In just about a month and a half, we'll be over at a Syracuse high school helping them fix some of their library shelves so books don't fall behind and students can't see them. So if any of you in the city of Kaysville have suggestions or things that you'd really like to see business members be a part of, please reach out to us and let us know. We're really looking to be involved in the community that we live and work in. So thank you for your time, and we appreciate being here today.
Do you have any questions for us?
Any questions at all from the council? The purpose of that's great.
I just have one suggestion. We've started a new committee in Kaysville called Healthy Kaysville, and the committee chair so happens to be here tonight. If you want to raise your hand or stand up, Ron Zollinger, if you want to talk to him after, they're just starting up, and what you do might be a great fit for that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. I was just going to say we started Business Spotlight with the intent of highlighting local businesses in our community that oftentimes folks don't even know about. And even though Gibbs Smith Publishing has been around for a really, really long time, we're sure there are probably some in the room who are enlightened to hear a little bit about what you have to offer. So we appreciate you coming. Councilmember Garn?
Just one brief comment, not really a question, but as you were talking, I was thinking it's really refreshing to sometimes people have a lot of good ideas, myself, but they never get implemented, and you have actually done that as a company, making a positive difference in the community, and I commend you for it. Thank you.
It takes time, and it's been slow sometimes, but it's nice to see some momentum and some change.
And actually, just a quick point on that, how we really got that started is because it's hard to, as a business, to say this one person is in charge of doing that. So that's why we created a committee that's a volunteer. So we have about 10 people on our volunteer committee who all put their heads together and contribute a little bit of their time to make sure that we're continuing to meet the standards that we want to meet to be a benefit corporation. So that's just our strategy on how we did it. So thank you.
You guys are a great team, and Gibbs is a great leader to do what he's done to empower you guys and create that family and that corporate harmony amongst you all. So he's to be commended, and so are you.
It's definitely been part of Gibbs's mission from the get-go, and I think that the B Corp just allows us to mobilize what he's always seen for his company.
Very cool. Thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. The next item we have on our agenda is call to the public, and actually I just point that out. We do have agendas available over here on the wall to your left if you'd like to grab one and check off as we move through tonight's agenda. The next item we have is call to the public. This is the time in our city council meeting when we open the microphone to any of you in attendance that would like to address the city council. We do not have any public hearings scheduled as part of tonight's agenda item. So if you wanted to address the city council, this would be your opportunity to do so. We do ask that you keep your comments limited to 3 minutes. Our city recorder does keep track of time, so when you hear the not so subtle beep up front, that's an indication that your time has expired. Maybe I just have one question. Item number 10 on our agenda is consideration of a development agreement and rezone of 1.53 acres of property at 1450 South Burton Lane from R120 single-family residential to LI light industrial zoning district. How many of you are here tonight regarding that item? Okay, so a couple of you. Again, we don't have a public hearing scheduled. That is the last item on our agenda tonight. In the past, we have offered to break up call to the public, just meaning that we open call to the public now for anyone who would like to address the city council regarding something other than that item, just so maybe we could separate it a little bit and then come back and reconvene call to the public briefly. The two primary reasons, my sense would tell me we will probably move quickly through the agenda and get there, but in case we don't, it's sometimes a little frustrating on an issue like this to hear your feedback and then not talk about it for an hour or two. I really don't think it's going to take that long, but if the council doesn't have any objection, maybe we'd break up call to the public and provide that opportunity right before agenda item 10 for those who would like to speak to that agenda item. Does that work for everybody?
Sounds
Yep.
good.
That works.
All right, so if you opt to exercise call to the public now, I would ask you to keep in mind it's not two opportunities, it's still one. But if you would like to share your comments or call to the public, we will reconvene call to the public a little bit later on in the meeting, and then still provide that 3 minutes at that time. So with that, we'll open call to the public. Part one. And just one at a time, please, if you come up.
Mr. Mayor, may I approach?
Yes, thank you. Okay.
My name is David Robinson. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, and all others observing this meeting in this room or on simulcast. My purpose in speaking to you this evening is without reference to any specific item on the agenda, but is to publicly bring before you concerns that are worthy of your attention and action. Those concerns are, however, evidenced by some recent matters before the council. It is a grand privilege to be a resident of Kaysville City. My family loves everything about it, and most particularly, the good people with whom we share a common cultural heritage. In spite of all that is good, over the last 18 months, a cancer of serious consequence has crept into our city. It is eroding the fabric of our city's government. It is unseemly and inconsistent with the goodness of those who live in the city. I speak of the dissension, discord, bullying, destruction of decorum, and the resulting deterioration of the effectiveness of our city government by the attitude and behavior of a council member. My plea this evening is twofold. First, I encourage the council to hasten its adoption of council policies and procedures to arrest the divisive action of any council member who behaves in the destructive manner we have all observed. Second, to all of our community who have matters before our city's council, planning commission, departments, or individuals in city government, about which there may be serious differences of opinion, I plead in all cases we will act with civility and consideration for each other. There will never be a matter that is so important that we discard the basic dignities and standards of our cultural heritage. May I share with you my experience over an issue which generated strong opposition to a matter before the council. When Boondocks was in the process of gaining the city's approval for its construction and operation, I was selected by our neighborhood to carry our concern and objections to the city council. The initial position of the neighbors in whose backyard Boondocks was to be located was in the strongest terms to deny approval. That argument was made before the council and is clearly evident it did not prevail, and it may well be because of the person making the argument. Soon after Boondocks opened, that was me, by the way. Soon after Boondocks opening, neighbors experienced legitimate negative impact because of concussions from pyrotechnic features, noise from loudspeakers, and excessive lighting, reaching into the nearby homes and yards. Some of those occurrences were exactly what we warned the city would happen. Initial requests for mitigation to boondocks management did not result in any response. In hindsight, I believe they were so consumed with opening and operating their facility that they simply had other priorities. Through the good graces of Mayor Hyatt, 2 meetings were held with boondocks management and our citizens group. Actually, with very little effort and willingness on the part of all to listen to each other, with genuine empathy, the problem features of the park were corrected. Boondocks became and continues to be a good neighbor. I am not an advocate for any single petitioner before the council and have no personal investment or benefit related to the outcome of any specific matter. But in the best interests of us all, I make a plea with those who are in serious disagreement over issues before the council to 1. Question and consider motives of those who solicit, encourage, and foment disagreement and contention. Let legal issues between parties be resolved through the courts when such issues do not directly relate to or affect the city's actions. Cool down heated rhetoric. Tone down unkind and demeaning references to those with whom disagreement is found. Work with an expectation that others are acting in good faith with an intention to be good neighbors. Seek solutions and not the basis for argument. And act in all ways in keeping with this wonderful cultural heritage we enjoy together. We in Kaysville are better than that manifest in our recent history.
Thank you. Any other items for call to the public? Hearing none, we will close this portion of call to the public and return and provide an opportunity a little later on in the meeting as well. Thank you for the comments that have been shared. The next item we have on our agenda is appointment of poll workers and replacement of poll workers as necessary. Turn the time to City Recorder Maria Devereaux.
Hi, okay, this item, the county has finished the recruitment of poll workers for our primary election, and you each in your packets have a list of the poll workers for our city. Utah State Code requires the City Council to appoint poll workers for the election. And so what you're doing is we just need you to provide for the appointment of the poll workers for our city and request that you authorize the replacement of any of these poll workers should the need arise.
So are you looking for a motion to appoint the poll workers as outlined, including any replacements as needed?
Correct.
So moved.
Oh, I'll make that motion.
Oh, sorry.
A second.
Second, maybe a second to, so we have a motion by Councilmember Garn and a second by Councilmember Lee for approval as outlined. Any further discussion? Councilmember Garn, will you start a vote?
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. The voting is unanimous. Next on our agenda is the adjustment of a common municipal boundary with Farmington City to remove approximately 0.40 acres of property from Farmington City and annex it into Kaysville City.
As an introduction to the item, we've discussed this on multiple occasions based on the process the state requires when considering a boundary adjustment. Just on the far south end of Kaysville City's Main Street, a little triangle you can see here on the map in front of you in yellow is currently part of Farmington City jurisdiction. It's access right away from UDOT. A property owner directly to the north of it has it under contract, is hoping to acquire it and bring it into Kaysville City for his use. We've held a public hearing a couple weeks ago regarding this without any comment. Farmington City currently actually had a hearing on this a while back, not having the applicant there based on a miscommunication of timing. Didn't know what was really happening with it, so they voted to deny it. But in further discussion with them, they felt it was appropriate to bring back up, so they've re-noticed it, and we'll actually be hearing this shortly after Kaysville City makes a decision one way or the other. So whatever actions taken this evening, whether it's to approve or deny the ordinance that would bring it in, is all subject to Farmington City also doing something, so we cannot record the adjustment without their cooperation and their ordinance. Mr. Johnson is here this evening. If you'd like to speak with him, and I'm sure he'd be happy to share what his intentions are if there are any questions from the council on that. But otherwise, ordinances have been prepared if it's acceptable to the council for your consideration.
Thank you, Council. We have discussed this previously, and the map outlines what is being requested. If there's desire to have the applicant come and address the council, we can ask him to do so. Otherwise, your option is to approve or deny the ordinance as outlined.
Well, I actually move that we approve the boundary adjustment with Farmington City.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilmember Page and a second by Councilmember Lee for approval of the ordinance as outlined. Any further discussion?
Just your staff recommendation was to make that contingent. Now, obviously, it is contingent upon whether Farmington adopts the ordinance as well on their end.
Correct.
Do we need to make that part of the motion?
And probably it doesn't hurt to make it part of the motion. And then I failed to mention it is in the ordinance itself, so the motion covers it. But just of note, the requested zone, it's an R110, which is what's adjacent to it and around it. So the passing of that motion not only brings in the piece of property into Kaysville City, but would assign the zoning to it as well.
Okay.
Thank you. So it doesn't sounds like we can provide an amended motion, but that the ordinance covers it. So I think the motion was approval as outlined, which would include the zone designation, and that's part of the motion. Any further discussion? Councilmember Adams, will you start a vote?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Voting is unanimous. Next on our agenda is preliminary and final plat approval for amendment to lots 26 and 27 of the West Creekside Estates subdivision located at 140 and 118 South, 2300 West. Robert Campbell and Christopher Barrett.
This is simply a lot line adjustment to a plat. Two properties highlighted here at the end of Creekside Estates subdivision. The request is just to move the property line slightly. The two neighbors have agreed to it. If you look real close, you can see the dashed line that runs across this way. That's the existing line. They'd like to readjust it to the new line this way. Give this guy a little more access to his backyard and frontage, and this guy a little more room in his backyard. It's equal amount of property. Both properties still comply with all the zoning ordinances for the area, and we'd recommend, as did the Planning Commission, approval of the preliminary and final plat for this lot line adjustment.
Thank you. Any questions from the council?
No, I will go ahead and make a motion to approve the preliminary and final plat for amendments to lots 26 and 27 at the West Creekside Estate subdivision.
I'll second that. Granted, there's no issues with it, and nobody here to complain, so looks pretty clean.
All right, we have a motion by Councilmember Lee and a second by Councilmember Adams for approval as outlined. Any further discussion? Councilmember Lee, will you start a vote, please?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Voting is unanimous. Next on our agenda is final plat approval for the Ray subdivision located 1120 West Webb Lane, Pawnee Ray.
We reviewed this recently as a preliminary plat. The property is located just west of Flint Street on Webb Lane, as outlined here. Fairly large piece of ground. At the preliminary plat approval, the request was to do 3 lots, including a flag lot, as shown here on the preliminary plat that was reviewed at that time. After review, the family has decided they would like to only do 2 lots at this time, aligning them such that the flag lot could be added at some time in the future if it was necessary. This was again reviewed by the Planning Commission and recommended for final plat approval.
Thank you. Any questions by the council?
No, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the final plat for the Ray subdivision.
Second.
Thank you. A motion by Councilmember Lee and a second by Councilmember Snell for approval as outlined. Any further discussion? Councilmember Snell, will you start a vote?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Voting is unanimous. Next on our agenda is final plat approval for the Meadows at Webb Lane subdivision at 1191 and 1223 West Webb Lane. Mr. Thompson.
This project's just down the road from the last one, again on Webb Lane, in about the middle of the road. Property highlighted here. We reviewed this preliminary plat recently as well. Consists of 10 lots, including the 2 existing homes on the property with a simple cul-de-sac. They've now completed the engineering and are ready for final plat approval. The final plat is very much in compliance with the preliminary plat and with the R120 zone, and it's been recommended for approval by the Planning Commission as well.
Thank you. Questions from the council?
According to the plat, it looks like all full improvements will be done along Webb
Yes.
Lane, the Webb Lane frontage, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
In front of the two existing homes even?
Yeah.
Correct?
Standard requirement.
Outstanding. Then I'll make a motion for final plat approval for the Meadows at Webb Lane subdivision.
I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilmember Snell and a second by Councilmember Page for approval of the subdivision as outlined. Any further discussion? Councilmember Page, we start a vote.
Aye.
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 All right, next item on our agenda is number 9, final plat approval for Anglers Cove subdivision at 373 East Shepherd Lane. Brock Johnson.
I've seen this one recently as well. This is on just off of Shepherd Lane and 350 East. This property highlighted in yellow. Again, existing house on the front part of the property fronting Shepherd Lane. The property was rezoned to R1LD to provide for 2 additional lots to the north. This was the preliminary plat that was approved, again showing the 1 big lot and the 2 slightly over 1/3 acre lots conforming with the LD zone, meeting the 2 unit per acre density. They have completed the final plat and it's now ready for final plat approval. This also includes full street improvements as proposed.
Thank you. Any discussion, questions by the council?
I'll just point out briefly that the LD zone allows for some flexibility, so the total project is still less than 2 units per acre in compliance with the general plan, but the LD zone allows for some flexibility in the individual units, which makes sense in a lot of cases, including this one, I think. And with that, I'll make a motion to approve final plat for the Anglers Cove subdivision at 373 East Shepherd Lane.
I'll second the motion and offer my appreciation that you're willing to uphold what the general plan says.
Thank you. A motion by Councilmember Garn, a second by Councilmember Adams for approval as outlined. Any further discussion? Councilmember Garn, will you start a vote?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Next on our agenda is consideration of a development agreement and rezone of 1.53 acres of property at 1450 South Burton Lane from the R120 single-family residential to the LI light industrial zoning district. Now, fortunately, we don't have any rule that says we take an average of agenda item times and apply it to all the way across the board. We recognize this will take a little more time to discuss and ensure that we have the opportunity to understand all sides of this issue. We did indicate earlier in the meeting that we would reconvene call to the public. I'd first like to just ask staff to give us maybe a recap of what's brought us to this point, or maybe I can do that. This has been discussed in a previous city council meeting where we found that the item was not appropriately noticed to those in the area, sent the item back to the Planning Commission to consider and hear. The Planning Commission held a public hearing, another public hearing. So for some of you, it was the first time you were aware of that public hearing, and was heard in that setting. It came back to the City Council at our last City Council meeting, which was 3 weeks ago, and a request was made by the applicant and some of the property owners to table it to until our next City Council meeting, which is tonight. And that is what has brought us to this point. The City Council has before them a development agreement, a request for rezone from R120 to light industrial, and a development agreement that if the City Council were to take action, would reference that development agreement in the action that they would consider tonight. Is there anything that I haven't covered? Or I'm sure there's plenty I haven't covered, but is there, in summary, anything else we need to add?
Probably perhaps just to add, one of the requests from the Planning Commission in their consideration of the most recent hearing was some of the items that are listed within the development agreement, but also that the traffic study essentially be done to consider the impact of that. That way the council was more informed in the decision that was made. To that, the applicant, if I can explain it, I guess they have GPS units within their truck, so they provided some data from a few weeks throughout that are within your packet that showed where the trucks were on 3 separate weeks and the number of trucks on different days. I don't know if you've got that, Andy, on the slide. So they have an average, it changes day to day, 14 on some days, 7, 3 on others. So they've averaged out their weeks, and these bars indicate some of those numbers: 7.9 vehicles one week, 6.8 another on the weeks that we've got in here. And then separate from that, to get more of a third party, I guess you would say unbiased, look at that to make sure we're getting the good numbers. We also requested that another firm pick a random day and look at some counts as well. And they had essentially set up a camera that they were able to then look at footage later and see how many cars came in and out of the site, totaling a number of 10 cars, I believe, on the day that they observed the site. I think beyond that, I believe the mayor covered probably where we stand with this, but that was the additional information requested from the commission for your consideration.
Thank you. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we'll open the opportunity for call to the public. I just maybe want to give one quick preface to that. We'll have this portion of call to the public. We'll close call to the public. Then we'll get back into the agenda item, including hearing from the applicant, staff, and discussion from the council. This has been I know for some, has been a pretty intense issue. I know there are pretty strong feelings and varying opinions on all sides. And to be honest with you, I don't blame anyone for that one bit. If a similar request was being made right around my backyard or in my neighborhood, I think I would have the same reason to feel concerned. The only thing I would just ask or request from everyone is we don't want to create an environment of hostility on either side. If you hear something that you like, that you agree with, maybe nodding would be good. If you hear something you don't like or that you disagree with, we'd ask you to hold off on any applause if there's something you like, and we'd ask you to hold off any booing or hissing if there's something that you don't like. We want everyone to have an opportunity to come up and address the city council equally. So with that, we will open call to the public.
Hello, my name is Jim Puffer. Is it possible that I can have longer than 3 minutes because I'm the...
You can. Right now we're in the call to the public portion, so you can take 3 minutes now, but we will also give you an opportunity on your agenda item. Well, I guess we're on your agenda item, so if you'd like to take I mean, yeah, it's your item, so you wouldn't be limited to 3 minutes, of course.
So I can go ahead and proceed.
Sure.
Are you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much.
Well, I think you just asked. Well, I mean, actually, Mr. Puffer, I think we'll give you the opportunity to address the council. Right now, we are in the call to the public portion of the meeting. We did, normally everyone would have spoken before you had the opportunity to come up, and we're trying to kind of maintain that consistency.
Perfect.
So you are welcome to speak and call to the public if you would like, just like anyone else, but you will have an opportunity that wouldn't be limited later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Terrell Rahm, and I'm here in opposition, obviously. While Andy's bringing that up, may I ask those in the audience who are here in opposition to please raise their hand? Okay, I just want to make sure for myself. Well, we're watching here in just a brief second once we get it on both screens.
All right, we'll start your 3 minutes after we actually get it up on the screen.
Right, I'll be brief. There's a lot of people who want to go tonight. Okay, what you're seeing here is just a 10-second video clip. I emailed the city council who've seen this video clip, just so you're aware. This is just taken from my backyard during our family night. This is just 10 seconds. And you can hear the rocks that are being dumped. This was done on multiple occasions, understandably for the landscaping things. But this is what we're here to speak against tonight. There's a quote that I heard or read on Facebook says, "Our charge is to make a difference for good, and the opportunity is ours." And that's why we're here tonight, to voice that opposition. hopefully we can be civil in that. But we're just here to voice our frustration that it's gotten this far and what's best for Kaysville. In reading the development agreement, my main point on this is, in the development agreement it says that there'll be trees surrounding the area. It's interesting to note that in the slide deck that was presented in the previous city council, all the trees that were shown, just as a mock-up, I understand, were made in fully mature trees, 20 to 30 feet tall, when the reality is the development agreement will not be planting 20 to 30 feet mature trees, thus encasing the development or the area in question here, obscuring the view, as it would be said. Also, it would not also stop the sound and the dust that was suggested it would, blocking that view from what you see there. The main point is here is we're concerned as the many citizens here of the safety of our neighborhood and the environmental impacts. The trees may go in, but it's not going to stop the sound coming in to our backyard where we like to play basketball and hang out with our family. And in the end, it's truly a frustrating experience, not on your behalf, just on ours, to have moved into an area that was, I said before, zoned residential, nothing was there, and now it's here being moved to light industrial in a way that would affect our home and our family. And then just quickly, just to close, I think the city of Kaysville, we've really suffered enough lately, right? First we had the loss of Gordon Hayward, and now we have Stayward, right? And now we're having this as well. I hope we don't lose this one as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Hal Anderson. I have a daughter at 1455 Appaloosa, right over the fence. She and her husband and 4 children are currently in Okinawa. They're serving a, excuse me, a military obligation. So I am their voice. Just a few houses down on Paddock, I have another daughter, her family, and 4 children. So I'm invested with 2 families and 8 grandchildren. I helped build the home at 1455. It is the most significant investment that these young people have. And the notion of having that quiet enjoyment disturbed by an outside industrial type business is unacceptable. I wish Mr. Puffer no harm, no ill will in any way. I think there's a place to locate businesses that are compatible. And this, as we speak, is an R120, a residential zone area. To change that at this point in time, after people have built, planned, and spent their money and mortgaged their futures, I don't understand it. I don't understand how you have 181 signatures on a petition. You have literally hundreds of constituents of Kaysville, voting constituents versus one party and a business. It doesn't make any sense to me. I wonder what the nexus is. Several years ago, I bought an arena down in South Salt Lake. There was a hospital going in. It needed to be dismantled, and it was time sensitive. We began dismantling that. The 3rd day we went to the project to dismantle it, we were red tagged. Draper City wanted to see who was involved. I went up to Draper City. It was my project, and I had not obtained the proper permit. I have not paid the fees. 2 days. 2 days we were shut down. This has gone on for several months. I don't understand it. It is a residentially zoned area. The integrity of that should be maintained. The property values should be bolstered and significantly maintained over time. I would ask this body the relationship that Mr. Puffer has had over the years with Kaysville City. I would like to know the involvement financially, and hopefully that illumination is not part of the nexus that seems to be a drive to pound a square peg in a round hole. It's residential. That's how I would like it to remain. And for safety, for noise, this development agreement, we're talking about mitigating noise and dust, et cetera. There's no reason to mitigate it. Shouldn't be there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. My name is Ryan Bingham. I reside at 476 Spur Court, just off of Appaloosa. I'll be brief in my comments today. I know that there has been some contention. I am in opposition of Mr. Puffer rezoning to light industrial. There's been some contention and some concern from the City Council in terms of citizens' behavior and responses maybe have been a little bit less than admirable. Please understand, though, that one, we were not made aware that this was taking place, and then when we were made aware, it was kind of after the fact, after Mr. Puffer had already been on the property and had already begun business. And so please understand that if we were defensive in any way, it was because we felt left out and not involved as the process should be. I'll just say, remember, it wasn't the citizens who made a gentleman's agreement with Mr. Puffer to use residential property for light industrial purposes. Once it was discovered by myself and others, I hope you can understand if we were defensive, we just didn't appear like the city was playing by the rules. On the city website, land use and zoning page, it states in the Kaysville Municipal Code, and I'll reference that, 17-1-2, and I would just cite this and have you remember this as you make your vote, please. It says this: Kaysville's planning and zoning ordinances are designed to, quote, provide for the health, safety, and welfare and promote the prosperity, improve the morals, peace, and good order, comfort, convenience, and aesthetics to the municipality and its present and future inhabitants and businesses, to protect the tax base, secure economy in governmental expenditures, foster agriculture and other industries, protect both urban and non-urban development, and finally, to protect property values. It has been stated in some email correspondence between myself and other citizens that maintaining the property value is not of concern for the City Council, and if that is true, then this municipal code is inaccurate. If I take it out of context, I take it out of context from the city's webpage. Passing this rezoning is not in the best interest of Kaysville's present and future inhabitants and businesses. As it stated, the zoning ordinances are there to provide the health, safety, welfare, and promote prosperity, improve the morals, peace, and good order, comfort, and convenience, and aesthetics. I see several areas where, if rezoned to light industrial, it would violate these ideals the city has set for itself. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings to all. My name is Nancy Villamizar, and I am the property owner right next to the one in question this evening. First, I want to thank you for your responses to my emails and also for those of you who were able to talk to me in person. I appreciate that, and I understand that you are obligated to work for the people that you represent. As I have stated before in several emails and in talking to you, and in my presentation to the Planning Commission, I am extremely opposed to the rezoning to this property for several reasons. My overall view is that I should be able to feel protected in my neighborhood by the residential zoning that is in place. A residential zone is a safe place where I can raise my children without anything that interferes with or jeopardizes the quiet environment and safety in and around my home. I do not expect heavy machinery or commercial traffic in front of my house, creating safety issues to my children and my family and my neighborhood. I should feel free to open my windows as I have in the past without worrying about the dust that is coming from a landscaping operation company next to me. Or I should not be worrying about listening to the trucks loading and unloading the piles of rocks. I don't think that this is the right place for this business. I don't think that is safe. I think that is a nuisance, and I think that is illegal. I want to ask you to please think about our family that is right next to it, and how would you feel if you were next to them, and how you were before, and now you have to change. I also would like to say that If this, I just read the proposal that was on the website, and in it, I think is very vague, and I don't think that it even addresses safety for my side. It says something about a fence on the west side. What about the southeast side, where it's colliding with my property next door? What is the difference? It also says something about dust. How do we know how much dust is not enough? I don't think right now it's enough. How are we going to measure that? And when we have these agreements in places, who is going to come forward when those people that are supposed to do things are not doing them? Do we have to be in a legal battle through years? I don't think that is right. I think that agreements are great, but in this case, I think it is best if we just do not rezone and leave the property as it was, residential zoning, to protect those around us. I plead with you as members of the Kaysville City to listen to the people. In my opinion, this is a no-brainer. The neighbors are unanimous in it. If you rezone it, this might bring something that says that some people can come and do their business and then just come and rezone later. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dessa Volmar, and this is about the last place I want to be, but I feel like I need to make a couple of comments. Most of you have heard from me, well, you've all heard from me at least once, most of you twice. If I may just point a couple things out on this picture. So this is the lot we're talking about, and just because you've all seen it, but just to be clear, this is already zoned light industrial, as is this, which is the city property. This is the storage units. My home is right here. So I am effectively the closest thing the east side of Appaloosa homes have as a backyard neighbor. As I've told you guys, I don't have really strong opinions on the rezoning. I think there are arguments on both sides. I think there are advantages both ways. I think if you were to rezone at the light industrial, I think there are some advantages because it allows us to put a development agreement in place that carries forward with the property. And allows us to, take care of some things and concerns that you have. As was pointed out, the addition of the traffic information, I was just going to comment, I think it was Mr. Thompson in the Planning Commission hearing, stated industry standard for a residential use is 10 trips per day. So we're effectively the same as if there was a house with a truck and a Suburban there. I firmly believe that any citizen should have an opportunity to voice their concerns about anything that happens next to their homes. But my concern is I think that in this situation there's been a lot of misinformation and frankly a lack of realistic perspective. I think given that I live right next to the city property, and I've walked all of this, I've listened to all of the meetings, all of the concerns that have been there. And I think, frankly, probably a lot of what is happening is being attributed to Mr. Puffer that isn't actually Mr. Puffer's business. Probably a lot of it is noise and dust and trucks from the city property, from construction that is happening west of us. And so I just think we need to be realistic about what we're talking about. And that doesn't mean that anybody's concerns aren't valid, they are. My next point, and this is the part that is really difficult for me, Nancy just stated that the neighbors are unanimous. Mr. Anderson stated that he intended no harm for Mr. Puffer. I think it needs to be pointed out that we were sued as an HOA yesterday. Mr. Puffer was sued personally, his business was sued, our HOA, the Old Mill Village HOA, was sued, and all of our volunteer board of directors members were named personally in that lawsuit. So I hope, Nancy, that all of the neighbors aren't unanimous in that, because that makes me really sad for Kaysville and for the gentleman who spoke at the beginning, because if that is the way we are going to try to do business is with threats, and we have more money than you, and we'll bankrupt your HOA, I'm sad today to be part of Kaysville. I wish you luck.
My name is John Palmer. I'd like to speak to the issues with a little bit of a different perspective. I do not live anywhere on that map that you see here. I actually am over on the west side of Sunset. However, this is of particular interest to me and to many in my neighborhood, because that bridge that crosses I-15 that is depicted here is crossed by literally hundreds of cars driven by students and parents of students going from West Kaysville to Davis High at least 5 times a week, morning and afternoon, and often in both directions. It is already woefully undersized, and more significantly, it doesn't have any shoulders. Now, why is this important to me? For one, I'm a parent of high school students. I've had 3 children graduate from Davis, and I have 2 that are still students at Davis. Number 2, I have one of my children is a runner on the Davis cross country team. Running across that bridge is what they do. Why do they do it? Because there's just not much in the way of good pedestrian crossings over I-15. It's woefully inadequate. Now, you want to add to that undersized Burton Lane Bridge. You want to add to that these trucks. Now, these are not, with all due respect to the woman who just spoke, it's not a pickup and a Suburban. These are, we saw the pictures, dump trucks, large landscaping vehicles. I've seen landscaping, the kinds of vehicles that move landscaping material. I don't think it's analogous to a Suburban and a pickup. These are big vehicles that are way too big, considering that our children are pedestrians going across that bridge. There are bicyclists that want to go across that bridge going to and from high school, going to and from other activities on that side on the east or west side of the freeway. In my opinion, this is a very significant issue, and not just an issue to the people who back up to it. I recognize the concerns they have with regard to dust and noise and traffic, but those concerns with regard to traffic and safety are particularly acute to many of us who live on the west side of I-15, whose children attend school on the east side of I-15. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erica Locke, and I live at 1439 Appaloosa Avenue with my husband and 4 young children. Excuse me. Our house is behind the north end of the property in question. This is our first home. We've been here for over 8 years. We love our home, we love our neighborhood, we love Kaysville. We hope to stay here for a very, very long time. What wasn't part of our plan is this business or any type of light industrial business in such close proximity to our home and to our neighborhood. I know it was mentioned there's several other light industrial places near that. Now that storage area has been there. It's been there for a long time. We were all very well aware of that. It's not a high traffic place, and there's not dirt and noise and dust, so it's a little bit different in my perspective and from my experience. But I'll reiterate my concerns, most of which have been mentioned. I'll just kind of run through them from my perspective. First is the high traffic, the large vehicles that we're talking about. It's a high activity recreational area right there with the trail. Also right around the corner is the main thoroughfare for our children where they walk to school every single day. Traffic coming across that overpass and then curving is already kind of awkward. Not to mention there's a really weird angled driveway into the property. So it just makes it a little bit more dangerous, that's for sure, for both cars and people. Second, the effect this would have on our property values. Several neighbors who have sold their houses on our street in Appaloosa have talked to, and as they have dealt with potential buyers, main concerns are typically the pipeline and the rail line, and this would add another item to that list that could negatively impact. Third, noise, dust, and debris on the road. I think it's safe to say that the quality of life in our homes and our neighborhoods does not include consistent loud noises from trucks, materials, dust in the air, and debris on the roads as we drive to our homes. And lastly, I'm concerned with potential future use of the property. If this does get rezoned, and Mr. Puffer
moves his business and someone else comes in, we may have similar or worse concerns, what may move in the future. Overall, the nature of this business conflicts with the immediately surrounding residential uses, in my opinion. Another point I'd like to address, and Nancy mentioned a little bit about it, is the development agreement that requires or restricts certain things. And I would like to understand, I had asked this before, but how do those get monitored or enforced? I don't know if there's a process. I have been told there isn't much of a process, so that's concerning to me. Also, what happens if those types of things are breached? I'd like to understand what the process is from the city on that also. I've definitely learned a lot of new things in this process. It's the first time I've been involved. But, you know, similar to other folks, I have been a little bit disappointed in the process. Certain actions of people from all parties, certain things I've seen and read and heard from everyone, including city officials, has not been ideal. But I hope that each of you would have done your due diligence, understand and consider our concerns, and recognize them, and have a good understanding of what's happening here. And most importantly, keep our interests as citizens of Kaysville, who you represent, in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Jason Jones. I live on Appaloosa Avenue. Today is my 17th anniversary, and despite an enthusiastic proposal to attend the City Council meeting, I think my wife had something else in mind for our anniversary.
Is that why she's sitting over there?
So I'll be brief.
Sorry, Jason.
Thanks, Dave. But I wanted to say thanks for your service to our city. I know that you spend countless hours, and it's often a thankless job, so I appreciate your service. I am opposed to the puffer rezone, and I appreciate you taking time to table the issue so that we can try to work out a reasonable solution. I served for a term on the West Valley Planning Commission, and we had 3 situations where a rezone came back to bite us after the fact. One in particular I'd like to mention. A developer came in, promised that in a residential neighborhood he would develop high-density housing for seniors. So Grandma and Grandpa could come live here, we can keep the community together, this will be great. Subsequently, it got rezoned. The developer went under and sold to the Utah Housing Authority. The Utah Housing Authority said, great, we've got high-density housing already approved, let's make it chronically homeless housing. Much different approach, much different impact than what was originally sold as part of the rezone application. And so that's my concern longer term. And it wasn't just as isolated incidents. We saw 2 or 3 other cases during my short term where the same sort of thing happened, where longer term in proposed purpose for the rezone changed dramatically. So please keep that in mind. I have seen Mr. Puffer's Layton Tree Farm, and it's 24 of 5 acres are beautiful. There's lots of trees there. It seems to be well maintained. There is an acre that is dedicated to construction activities and garbage heaps. I think all of you have seen some of those pictures through email. In this case, we don't have 25 acres that are being rezoned. We have just the most impactful acre that's being rezoned that will be the high-intensity light industrial activities and the garbage piles that I'm concerned about. I'm also concerned because despite a development agreement, the neighbors there, not all of them, certainly the ones by the trees are happy, but many, in fact, I have dozens of pages of evidence that they've gathered with their concerns about the property. And so it's not an abstract concept. I'm opposed to the rezone. If you choose to rezone, please put into consideration some mitigating concerns regarding the noise. I don't think a chain link small fence is going to do the trick. I think it needs to be a sound barrier. I think there are restrictions to the size of rock, a foot or smaller in diameter, and I do have concerns about enforcement and adjudication. So please take that into into consideration if you decide to rezone. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Devon Hanson, and I live on Appaloosa as well. Thanks for allowing us to stand and share a few thoughts with you tonight. I'm grateful for the efforts that you make to make Kaysville great. I love living in Kaysville. It's a great location. It's a great city. You're great people. I love being a part of it. I love our community. I love our neighbor and friends, and so I stand as a voice as well to support those, especially those that are in closest proximity to the rezoning that's in question. I oppose the rezoning primarily for the impact that it would make on those individuals who are in closest proximity to the property. I think it's evident by those who have come to express their thoughts and feelings that there is a concern of those who reside in our communities about the impact that this would make. I much prefer to see what took place with the business spotlight, to see Gibbs Smith stand and be able to talk about the positive impact being in our backyard as their business and how it benefits the community. And we applaud those who are business people that come in and make a positive impact. And Jim Puffer Landscaping Incorporated is a great business. I can tell just by what I can see, but the question is the piece of property of where that business would operate out of. I think Mayor Hyatt said it the best when he said if it was going to be in my backyard, I would have a concern too and may come forward and express, and that's why I'm here tonight. There's that open property that's just to the east of the rail trail that my home backs to. And if a business such as this came into a residential zoning area and wanted that rezoning to be considered, I would hope that my neighbors and friends would come and speak up in behalf of me as well, to allow you as a council to be able to understand that we do have a concern and that it does impact us. What are the greatest impacts? Just from what I've seen, the noise that'll be generated from that. If you notice, where Nancy lives, many of the homes that are on that west side of that property are in very close proximity to this property where it's located. Also the dust. I don't know why that area right there, that ground is so dry and those particles fly in the air. But just the other day, particles whipping around in the air, visible. And I know that it's going to be a concern, and I think Mr. Puffer and that company understands that it's going to be a concern because they were out watering down the drive in the area to try to keep those particulates down. And I appreciate that effort, but I just know that's going to be difficult to do on a regular basis, to be out there wetting that soil and keeping it from flying. I know there are many arguments that can be made that it's an unusual piece of property and maybe this is the best use, but I don't think that should outweigh the impact that it can have based on the noise and the particulates. I appreciate you allowing me to take a few moments and hope that you'll consider our thoughts.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name's John Puffer. I'm Jim Puffer's older brother. And as anybody that has a sibling, you know you want to try and protect him. I've tried to protect Jim my whole life, but he's beyond that. But I could not stay seated without saying at least something about my brother. All he wanted to do was find a place to store some landscape material. He looked around, the city suggested for him to go look at this place. He went down, he looked at it. He did all he could to find out what he could about the property. He found out the property was owned by a homeowners association. He met with them. He asked them to get all the homeowners around so he could tell them what his plans were, what he intended to do with the property. He met with them. They okayed it. Little did he know at the time there was another homeowners association next door. When I was little, I was taught that when you have a disagreement with someone or you have issues with somebody, that you find out you find out who the person is, you call them up, and you ask them, what are your intentions here? Not more than 2 people, 2, have reached out to him from day one to sit down with him and ask him what his intentions are. I find it very ironic to hear some people stand up here, and I'm sure that they're coming from the heart, but now they're saying, well, maybe we could do something here, or maybe he could do something there, or maybe the boulders could be smaller. Where was this conversation months ago? Jim, when he first found out that there was going to be an issue with the residents there, he reached out to them, and they bit his hand off. How many times did he reach out to them and try to come with some sort of an agreement or sit down and discuss it and try to find a resolution to resolve this? 2 people, after the last council meeting, finally reached out to him and said, hey, can we sit down and talk? Where was this communication before? You know, the facts are, is he tried to find a place to put some landscaping materials. The city directed him to a location that they thought would help work with him. He investigated, he liked it, he found the property owner, at the time was an HOA. He met with them. He did his due diligence to find out, hey, here's my plan. He met with them, and they approved what he was doing. So he purchased the property. Told the city, hey, I bought the property. The city basically gave him permission to start moving materials on there last year. 6, 7, 8 months goes by, not a word, not a phone call to the city, not a phone call to the commission with their displeasure on what was going on there. Where was the conversation at that time? When he starts to find out that there is a problem, he reached out. Jim is honest. He's a great business person. And he's got more integrity than I wish I could ever get in my lifetime. But he reached out, not once, not twice, but how many times? And how many times did he get his hand cut off? The gentleman earlier said, well, we didn't know about the planning commission, so it's kind of an excuse that we were able to personally attack him and his family. Death threats, letters left in his mailbox. We're going to kill your dog tonight that his 10-year-old son read. What about the Facebook postings?
Could we see that?
Sir, I'm talking. What about the Facebook postings against his company? What about the Facebook postings against him personally?
Your time has expired, sir.
And where's the consideration there? He was approved to go ahead and move materials on there. He's reached out and tried to facilitate this. And so the commission has approved it. They voted to do it. I would ask that you follow their guidelines and go ahead and approve this, because he's done everything he can to make this right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Name's Vinny Fioli. I live on Paddock Lane. I hadn't prepared to come up here, but there's a lot on my mind as I listen to all the comments. I'm a business owner. I've been in the construction industry for over 20 years. I've built a lot of buildings in the state of Utah. I've watched and listened to all the things that have been said. I don't think I've ever been able to start a building without a permit, without permission to be on site and be able to get that moving. I'm very sensitive to Jim Puffer's business because now he has a cost that he's already incurred to move things there. And if this isn't zoned that way, he'll have to remove that material. I'm sensitive to the homeowners associations that are involved. I'm part of one of them. But there's something that really hits the heart for me. I grew up back east in a small town by the name of Boston. I had to walk to school every day, and where I grew up, right in front of me was an auto parts store. Just to the right was a liquor store. Right next to me was an auto body shop or auto repair shop. Right behind me was a Dairy Queen. I used to hop the fence and eat ice cream all the time. I had to walk to school, and when I walked, I had to go through industrial and commercial zones to get there. I live in my home with 6 beautiful children that walk to Endeavor Elementary, and they cross Burton Lane. There's no crosswalk, there's no school zone. Now you're adding trucks and other traffic there in front of my children. I have a big concern with that. That worries me. I know what it's like to be around those things. They don't stop on a dime, and I think it needs to be considered and be consistent as a city as far as what the zoning should be. There's been other individuals on the west side of Kaysville that have not been able to do things because of decisions that the council has made, and I ask that you be consistent in those decisions and also think about all the impacts with the schools that others have mentioned. And I also think you need to be considerate to the decisions that have already been made to allow Mr. Puffer to put his things there and the cost associated with him. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Gary Pierce. Mr. Mayor, can I approach?
Sure.
I sent you by email the petition of all 181 people. That's a copy of it. This particular map shows all of the homes that were canvassed in a matter of 4.5 days to get 181 votes in opposition to the rezoning. I think one of the issues that we've heard tonight is why the delay? Why the delay in coming to the city in opposition to this? And I guess in talking with the neighborhood, and I myself individually did not really notice what was going on during the winter months. We started seeing some things put over on the property, but wasn't sure exactly what the intentions were, who it was that it was actually moving in there. It wasn't until the spring when people started noticing and the community and the neighborhood began to discuss the issue. And that's when we came together as a community. That's when we said one way in which we can present to the City Council and the City Planning Commission, because we all live busy lives. We all do. And I appreciate each one of your service and commitment to the position that you have. But also those mothers and fathers who couldn't be here tonight, their names are there. They wanted you to know that they stand in opposition. Their concerns may be different than mine, whatever they may be, and you've heard that tonight. The concerns of health and safety and quiet enjoyment of the property and nuisance. All of those things, from my reading of the Kaysville City Code, are to be protected. They are to be held sacred in protection of the Kaysville citizens. Now, I'll tell you my main concern. I live around about 5 doors around on Burton Lane. And we've heard it, and I don't want to belabor the point, but let me approach the map, and I'll speak with my attorney voice. Here's the ingress and egress right here. It comes from a slant, and most of you, I'm sure, have been there to see it. But you come up at an incline, and then there's a short turnabout. My greatest concern is we have trucks that are probably 6 to 8 feet long, pulling trailers that are probably 8 to 10 feet long, in and out of that property. What was previously mentioned is how wide that lane is. We know that that is a main thoroughfare into Kaysville. I too share the concern. I have a 16-year-old that I would take to school when I went to work in the morning in Salt Lake. And I would be among the teenagers. And if any of you have them, okay, they go a little faster than typical, but that's a concern. If you have a large vehicle pulling a heavy load, crossing that, at a time when the traffic is high, in the mornings and in the afternoons, in my opinion, it's not a matter of when an accident will happen or if an accident will happen. It's a matter of when it will happen. My concern is for the safety of those children in our neighborhood that traverse that road, of us as adults who traverse that road. And then also, it's been cleaned up and straightened up within the last week or so. I've been in Hawaii for a month of June, so when I got back, I noticed this 8-foot piles of slate rock that were tilted over, that were a concern of kids climbing on them, have been brought down to a 4 or 5 foot level and straightened up. So there has been improvement. The water has been turned on to bring down the dust. That has helped. But still, I don't believe, as you've heard tonight, that that is a place consistent with our neighborhood's objectives, our quiet enjoyment, the nuisance that you've heard, the truck dumping rocks, and the traffic. And I would ask each of you to search in your heart. If that was in your backyard and you could no longer have a barbecue without the dust flying or the backing up of the forklifts beeping on and off all day, would that be quiet enjoyment?
Thank you.
I'm honored to be here as well, and my name's Dan Ozunian. I'm not from Kaysville City, but I actually sat on the board of the HOA of the Case Creek Estates Homeowners Association, where the tree farm that was mentioned a little earlier exists. As a matter of fact, the last 3 years on that board, I acted as the HOA president, and I was the actual one that sought out Mr. Puffer, and prior to him, several others, to take possession of the land that we had an obligation to keep weeds down and to keep under control. It was costing us a lot of money to do that on our own, and with our limited budget, we needed someone to come in and beautify that area and take care of the land. And there was some mentioning that there was 25 acres out there, of which 24 are nice and one that's not. That's not true. There's only 15 acres, of which I'd say the vast majority of it is covered in trees exclusively. There are some planter pots, if you will, and on occasion there will be some debris brought in from different job sites that would be considered waste that does at times then get hauled away. But for various reasons, the dump only allows certain things. We have certain locations he has to take it. But it really hasn't been a problem. As far as having the complaints of all the people that I was hearing, that there's dozens and countless people down there that are in opposition of what's happening there, that's not true either. There is a handful of individuals that do have concerns that are bordering the actual tree farm that we have. And I'm 100% convinced as an HOA president, and as you've sat in your position, that there are certain individuals that no matter what you do, they're going to complain and be upset and mad. I'm fully convinced we could drop golden bars of gold in their yard and they'd complain that they were shading something. It was just impossible. Some of the people were really difficult to deal with. Some of them had legitimate concerns, and as those were brought to my attention as the HOA president, Jim was more than willing to come and answer questions that people had and able to try to work and rectify things that were wrong. And I can tell you right now that as far as having honesty and integrity and to have a solid, honorable character, that is Jim Puffer. There's never been one issue we've had where we haven't been able to resolve it. And then we have also had people that have done nothing but slander and make Facebook comments that are derogatory and negative and other things that do nothing but not solve anything. But as he's been approached by those that do have concerns, and as I've been involved with that, we've always come to a solution and to a remedy. Now, my biggest concern is to hearing what I'm hearing here is that here's a man that engages with Kaysville City that does, in their turn, recommend a piece of property that is zoned, mind you, partial light industrial. I know that's a small portion, and the rest of it being a residential parcel, but yet no homes allowed to be built on that parcel. So it's kind of a vague use of what that land can be used for. My heart goes out. I understand we have a road that is narrow, disregarding whether or not he is there with the growth that we have out in this area. It's going to be nothing but continue to get worse, and I think that should be addressed outside of this issue completely. But as far as the zoning of the land and him going in and engaging and doing the business that he is, the light industrial portion is zoned for doing the kinds of things that he is trying to accomplish. And I know that if people were to have come to him early on, they'd be able to work some of those things out. But as far as I'm concerned, his character that has been in question and the slander that I've heard on Facebook and read personally, and some of the things that I've witnessed that have happened in this room with both officials, with the city, and with residents of the communities that are affected, I'm appalled. I mean, it's downright despicable. And the first comment that was made today, I would hold up in honor, and I think he's an integral man, this gentleman that came up. And I think that if you guys have a fiduciary responsibility to both back the people that approached him initially, namely the engineers in the zoning committee of this community that brought him to this location. And while there are concerns, I think you need to also understand where he's coming from and the approach that he took from the beginning that was nothing but integrable and honorable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other items for this portion of call to the public?
Council. Brett Tarbox, I live on 262 Greenbelt Circle. I live in the HOA that approved the sale of the lot to Jim Puffer. I'm here today because I'm just saddened to see where this has led us. That essentially what we're seeing is a microcosm of what we're seeing on the national level, where we have two parties or two factions that are divisive to the point where they won't compromise and they won't collaborate and come to an agreement that works out for all parties. When Jordan came to my home last night to ask me to come, I asked him what the update was on our west berm and the improvements. And he said it was on hold because we've been served by 4 residents. Actually, one of them isn't even a resident of the other development. And because we have to reserve those funds to defend our legal fees, that's on hold. All I really want is for this to all go away amicably, quietly. I live with these people. I go to church with these people. I've actually served in one of these people's yards with President Hansen. So it just saddens me that we've gotten to this point. If you want to direct your anger, Mr. Anderson, you can direct it towards Terry Deal. He's the one who started all this. He stiffed us. He stiffed the city.
Mr. Tarbox, I have you to continue to address the council, if you would, please.
He stiffed the city, and the city worked with us for years to finally get us to sell the open spaces. We agreed to sell the open spaces to the city, and they also relinquished us from the requirement that we needed to keep Mr. Puffer's property for open spaces. That's the nexus you're looking for, Mr. Anderson. That's where it started. Mr. Deal. Do a Google search, you'll find him. He's currently indicted on federal charges for another development. But he left the city hanging with an $8,000 bond that went belly up with Barnes Bank. The city defended that bond. They failed because it was secured by a line of credit instead of cash. The city has, of course, learned from their mistakes, and they've worked with us. We've been very pleased with the work that they've done with us. And frankly, we just want what we currently have done. Laureen, the answer to your question of why the HOA did not consult the neighboring HOA came to me when I asked my wife whether the Andersons consulted us before they sold their home. They didn't. I had no say in my new neighbor. I had no say in whether he did anything to his flower bed or had pets or anything like that. I'm sorry that we didn't consult the other HOA, but the thing is there was no precedent to do so. My wish is that we can come to some compromise instead of stirring the pot, that we find some way to come to an amicable win-win agreement for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Seth Ferber. I'll apologize, I have a bit of a cold, so I normally don't sound quite this raspy. I really don't have a whole lot of reason to be here other than I've kind of been watching this, and I've been involved in real estate and development over the past 15 years or so. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't know anybody involved. However, I do take an interest in this because of my field of career. So
I've looked at this property and isolating this piece and just looking at the property alone, it makes sense to be an industrial piece just by where it's located. The difficulty in any other type of development making sense, a single-family home, something like that. That doesn't mean that the concerns that these citizens have are not legitimate, because they are. However, I'm also a big fan of personal property rights and an owner's ability to do what makes the most sense for their property, of course, as I'm sure we all are. That being said, it is unfortunate that this has gone to the level it has, where there's another HOA being sued and all this other kind of stuff. It's unbelievable. To put just a slight positive spin on it, if I were one of the residents of the neighborhood most directly impacted, this is a great opportunity to get what you want. Short of, you know, you can say, I want nothing. I don't want it to be rezoned. That is an option. However, that may not happen. On the flip side, if it is going to be rezoned, you have the opportunity to really push to get what you want. Mr. Puffer is in a tough spot. He's bought the ground. He's doing his business there. He essentially can be asked to do whatever. If you want a 10-foot wall that's fully private and whatever, ask for it. You're in a good position. Whether that's fair to Mr. Puffer or not, I'm not the one to make that argument, but you're in a position to do so. And I should be speaking to you, the residents are in a position to do that. And so I guess I would maybe look at it a little more positively from that standpoint, that you have the ability to get more than you may otherwise would have. So that's all I had to say today.
Thanks.
Gerald McKenzie. I live on Appaloosa Avenue as well. I share a lot of the concerns that were reiterated here as it relates to traffic, noise, dust, safety, crossing over, Burton Lane. I think my perspective as it relates to why we're here at this point is, I think Mayor Hyatt, last month or so, when realizing that there may not have been perhaps adequate notice given, well, that's why we're here at this point in the city council meeting discussing it, because the notice hadn't been given properly at the time of the getting from the planning commission, so they could have had an opportunity to maybe render a different decision at that point. So that's kind of my perspective to answer some of the questions of why all now and not before. And I would just, advocate for the integrity of this process, that there's general use plans for the city, and would encourage that those be followed as they've been enforced in other cases where there's been similar petitions made and they've been denied for the use, and that's what we're out here recommending, as well as follow the same procedures that have been done in recent history and for other requests. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Missy Nielsen, and I am currently being sued because I am a volunteer member on my HOA board. As you've been told, our original developer kind of fled, didn't finish developing our neighborhood, and we thought, by being approached by a few people about selling that property, which the city allowed us to do, that we could get some money to kind of beautify the berm area in particular. There's been a petition that went around our neighborhood, and I do feel that a lot of our neighbors in our HOA were a little bit misled, and we're kind of grouping Jim Puffer's business with the city business. So the city has the really large dump trucks. They are stirring up a lot more dust. They're grinding up asphalt, and I think that Jim's getting blamed for a lot of what the city is doing. just to be fair. I'm pretty neutral on the rezoning, but I am obviously directly affected because I am being sued. I'm just appalled at this, you know. I'm just trying to do what's best for my little neighborhood. I apologize, I did not take into consideration the homes, and I apologize for that, I do. But I do want you to know, we have not received one complaint from our HOA about Jim Puffer and his business, not one. So there is a member of our HOA that is on the lawsuit, but he has not come to the board. He has not gone, you know, followed through. So like I say, I am neutral on the rezoning. I think Jim's business has actually made it look better than what it was. People were dumping just their garbage on that piece of property. So anyways, I just want you to know that this has gotten pretty ugly, and it's pretty disappointing to be in this position that we're in. So just keep that in your hearts. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other items for call to the public? Hearing none, we will close call to the public. We appreciate not only the comments that have been shared, but the manner in which they were shared. Appreciate everyone maintaining a respectful and tone. We've already had a staff update that's kind of given us a little bit. Mr. Puffer, I don't know where you went, asked to, there you are, asked to, I think this would probably be your opportunity now to address the City Council if you'd like to do so. After Mr. Puffer is done addressing the City Council, we'll have some council deliberations and probably just go one at a time to maybe give our observations, not our own call to the public, but kind of our own opportunity to share some perspective and then facilitate maybe some questions and answers between the council and Mr. Puffer.
Thank you very much. I don't know if this is working.
You hear?
Have we not heard anyone all night?
Jake, will you jiggle the plug? It's technical support in progress right there.
Right.
There you go. If you'll just hold that, Councilman Garn down there, that'd be great.
I'll just sit here. This is not in the budget. So. Okay. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. And I'm also grateful for the words that's been shared tonight. And honestly, I thought this was going to be a much more difficult night. And for people that I don't even know to stand up and to try to put a better perspective and try to defend me, it really means a lot. And I am very grateful for that. I'd like to just make sure that, just to make a critical note so that we all recognize that there's two issues that are taking place simultaneously. One of the issues that needs to be acknowledged is this rezone, that what we're talking about at 1450 Burton Lane. The second issue, however, is the lawsuit that's been filed against me and against the homeowners association that sold me the property, and then each individual member of that homeowners association. This rezone consideration has nothing to do with the lawsuit. It's important to note that the major portion of the lawsuit alleges that the CC&Rs from the Old Mill HOA are still part of the property that I purchased from the HOA, and it's simply not the case. I have with me a copy, if you'd like to see it, a seller's agreement disclosure form, which is dated August 19th, 2016. This document validates that this property would not be part of the Old Mill HOA after the sale. This includes the CC&Rs. So again, there's two issues. You have my application that I have on my property located at 1450 Burton Lane, which I'm trying to have rezoned as light industrial, which really should be heard by the City Council and voted upon. And then you have the lawsuit that's been filed by this newly created LLC, a group of individuals, from what I understand, mostly live in this equestrian HOA.
Mr. Puffer, could I maybe just mention,
You bet.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but the agenda item indeed tonight is the rezone. And while I find the news of the lawsuit unfortunate, it really is not, that topic is really not something that would be appropriate for this agenda item.
Okay. I've tried very hard to reach out to others and who oppose my petition of this property, so to hope that some good could come out of this experience. Unfortunately, I've been rejected by most. I've wanted to have a position, open dialogue of communication where issues could be discussed and diplomacy prevail. However, again, I have been rejected by almost all who oppose me. I had a difficult time understanding and comprehending why some would choose to be very mean and belligerent and unkind towards me, my family, and business. It's one thing, which I totally agree with, to have concerns about real issues, you know, the safety, the traffic, the dust, those kinds of things, but to choose to make this property issue so ugly by spreading untruthful things about my intentions and beliefs and in misleading many others is unfair and hurtful. I received some awful mail. I have had my Facebook, my Jim Puffer Landscape Facebook account held hostage, where cruel and mean and untruthful things were posted about the property. And all were done with the underlying premise of creating anger and hatred in an attempt to hurt me and my name and reputation, and in hopes that I'd simply go away. And it's just very disappointing. It would have sincerely been my hope to have sat down and to talk and tried to work through a lot of these issues. Why has the persecution and harassment and oppression been allowed to be seen as a fair and acceptable part of the process is beyond me. Why not discuss the issue at hand on the truth and not speculation or rumor? I truly believe there are many that are angry because they've been told lies and mistruths, and I'll point some of those out. I know that one council meeting that I was able to watch the video on, that one of the council members had, in my opinion, a rush to judgment. He indicated that my property deal was a backdoor deal and that I entered the property on my own risk, as I quote him, hoping to receive industrial later after moving all my landscapes materials on site, which is not true. This same individual indicated that Puffer's operation has started out illegal. So it's important to know the facts. So I asked this particular councilman, why such a rush to judgment? Why not come and talk to me about making all of these assertions? And I was told that he was too busy, that he has a family and he has other responsibilities, but to just not take the time to find and really seek out due diligence is really hurtful. I've been practicing as a business owner for 32 years. Most of those years have been here in the Kaysville area. My business is currently in the Kaysville Business Park. I'm building a building there in the Kaysville Business Park. When I was asked to relocate, and many of you may or may not recognize, but I've been leasing some property that the city owned that's directly behind the Kaysville Public Works building. And it's mainly an area to keep my trailers and a few odds and ends in terms of landscape materials and so forth. Most materials are typically taken to job sites. These are to pull from in terms of flagstone, a boulder or two, things like that. But the city asked me to relocate, and so I asked several individuals from the city if they had any idea where I could go, because there's just not very much property available for people in my situation. And I was told by a number of city individuals that the city had purchased some acreage from the Old Mill HOA and there was still one parcel available, that it wasn't a real positive piece of ground because there's literally a blanket easement across the entire property. I contacted the Old Mill HOA and spoke with an individual by the name of Jordan Kamak. I had never met Jordan before, at least I'm not aware of, and he invited me to an HOA meeting where I could discuss the possibility of perhaps purchasing the property. At this time, there were a number of others that were also interested in the property, and the city allowed these individuals the opportunity to express their points of view as well. I was told that I could bid on the property after explaining what I wanted to do. I literally just wanted to move everything that I had on the city's property over to this property, and I had no real resistance. So I bid on the property. My bid was accepted as the high bid. And before actually purchasing the property, I met with Steve Bruff, who was the HOA's realtor, and indicated to him that I was concerned because part of the property was that the city owned was light industrial, but the rest was this residential. So a phone call was made, and city individuals were spoken to, which assured Steve Bruff and myself that I could, in fact, make the move and move the property over to this particular spot. I wasn't too concerned about it because the property just directly east across the property that I was to purchase was light industrial, and the property just to the north that the city had just purchased from the same HOA, which was also open space, had been recently changed to light industrial, the same as I'm trying to do. I had my son, in fact, Taylor, who's 28, go next door and speak with the neighbor. And forgive me if and I sincerely apologize if I don't say this right, but I believe her name is Nancy Villamizar. And on a number of occasions, he met with her because we wanted to ensure her of what we were doing and that we would do anything to make sure that she was satisfied with what we were doing. He gave her his phone number, and he said, if there's any issue whatsoever, please contact us. Even as recent as the spring of 2017, when everything at that point had been moved over to the property, including all of my equipment, trailers, tractors, things like that, sat on this property. You could see the logos on my trailers, on my enclosed trailer, and so forth. Even at this point, there was nothing that was brought up, as far as I know, that would indicate there was a concern with the way that we had brought the materials onto the property. At the time that we brought the materials on, I had broken my tibia and my fibula in half and was unable to walk and literally could hardly get out of bed. And so I instructed my employees to put it on the property as best as possible, and we'd later organize it, which we have now done. When I learned that there was a concern about the palletized rock, I realized that this was a rock I really didn't need, and I had the rock removed off of the property and crushed into stone as an attempt to try to help with some of the other concerns. So when I went to the city planning meeting, I was absolutely shocked when Nancy voiced her opposition because I had no idea that we had offended her in any way. And that would never be my nature to do so intentionally. Anyway, with the blessing of the HOA and the city, I moved onto the property, and I was there from mid-September all the way until mid-May without a single complaint that I'm aware of, not one. In fact, I asked the city personnel if they had ever received a complaint, and they were unaware of any complaints. Again, this is during the time period when all of my equipment is there, where this time of year, typically my equipment is typically on job sites. It moved to the Planning Commission, and all voted in favor but one. However, he was actually in favor of the rezone. He simply voted against it because he felt the restriction was too restrictive. So after the meeting, I was told by city leaders that I would be made aware of as to when the proposal would be heard from the city council. When the proposal made it to the city council, I was not in attendance because the city unfortunately did not tell me or forgot to tell me about the meeting. So within this meeting, negative, untruthful things were said about one of the city council members and some concerned citizens. The city ended up sending back my petition back to the Planning Commission, and after being heard in a very, very difficult, angry type situation, the committee, or the Planning Commission, still voted 3-2 to allow the rezone. The exaggeration in the use of this land has been grossly exaggerated and has caused many to be against me simply because they don't know the truth. For some, it appears that it's okay to be ingenuous and to spread falsehoods in an attempt to mislead others so that the end results are attained, and no matter what the cost is, yet it's just not right. And we as a society must and can do much better. Please allow me for a moment or two to present some facts about this property to help dispel some of the false accusations that have been shared. If we could first go to the first, on my PowerPoint presentation, the first picture, that would be wonderful. So this is the property in question. As you see, the road is 37.5 feet wide. The city actually owns 50% of, or 50 feet of the property that is, in fact, zoned light industrial. Then there's 150 feet of property that runs to the back fence, and then 80 feet between my fence and the neighbor's fence. Could we go to the next picture? Where's all the garbage? This is one of the easements. I was surprised to find that there are actually 15 easements on this property. This is probably the most difficult one. So this is the property in question. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is showing the easement on the property. So the only area of the property where you could actually build anything on the property is that small pie sliver that you see that's not in the hatched area that's next to the hillside. The rest of the property, there are just scores and scores of exclusions in terms of what you could do with this property. So even though it's zoned residential, I find that ironic because you could never build anything residential on this piece of property. It just wouldn't be possible. Could we go to the next slide? This is the present area of what we have done in terms of trying to organize things. And again, we have removed 60 pallets of stone and turned it into gravel. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, we have tried very hard to organize this in a way where it would look aesthetically pleasing if one was to drive by. Next slide, please. Again, these are the bins. Again, the same materials that were being housed over on the Kaysville property. Next slide, please. There's a number of boulders there, and I've heard a number of accusations that would suggest that we're dumping boulders there every day. To my knowledge, we haven't delivered any boulders to this site since we made the move. In fact, the rock that you see there is the rock that was moved over in the original move of the property. Here's some more palletized stone. In fact, you'll notice also the weeds. If you drive around the corner, the weeds are probably, I don't know, 3 to 5 feet tall. Even though that's the city's property on the hillside, on the Burton Lane side, we are maintaining to try to make that look nice. Next slide, please. Here's our proposal, and this is something that we have talked about from the very beginning. Being a landscaper, being that I have a tree farm, I believe that we could shield the public from looking directly into this property. We also would like to be able to grow some trees that we could later harvest. If you look to the far right, where you see all the small circles, those would be trees that we would grow on site, later harvest, use them on other properties, and grow new trees. If you look to the left, where you see all of the other circles, The ones that have kind of more of a, they have a dot in the middle and almost a plus sign through them. Let me point those out.
Lyle, do you have a pointer you can leave up there?
Those trees. Oh, thank you. Those trees would be Austrian pines, and I actually have a number of Austrian pines, and they do range in the area of 20 to 25 feet in height. They would make an immediate impact to the area, to the environment, which I would like to show you in a moment. The bigger rounded circles would represent maples, and these would be a beautiful autumn blaze maple that would also shield. So a nice combination of deciduous trees as well as evergreens. The intent here is to shield everything. Everything over here on what street is that?
Deseret.
Deseret, and then everything on Burton Lane area. We've made a significant improvement so that when our workers are coming out of here with a truck and or trailer, that they are sitting perpendicular to the property, not at an angle. These other small circles here would also represent a type of columnar tree that we would like to implement. Again, all this would be watered and would be beautiful, and again, would shield the public from looking directly into the property. These other trees that I've marked back in here would be to eliminate any kind of view from the neighbor's property that's directly west of that property. We most certainly would want to shield him as much as possible. Across the rest of this area here are a lot of existing trees. There's some really big native, I think most of them are cottonwoods and such, and it blocks everything out as far as I'm concerned. Could we go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to show you a picture where this red, these arrows and so forth is, to where the picture was taken from that point of view. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is what you currently would see, although this is a picture that was taken before a lot of things were taking off. But this is typically what you're going to see. When we plant, and we're not talking about putting in smaller trees, we're talking about putting in bigger trees. This is what our hope would be, is that we would have some beautiful combinations of evergreens and deciduous trees. Could we go to the next slide, please? This is taken from the very corner of the property where you can see looking directly into the property. Presently, this is what you see. What we'd like to do is plant evergreens as well as deciduous trees, which will block things out. It's not going to block out everything 100%. We're never going to have the overlap like that, but it most certainly makes a big impact in terms of how things would look aesthetically. Could we go to the next one? This is another perspective from Burton looking westward. This is what you would see presently. This is what you would see after we plant in our trees. Next slide, please. This is the perspective from, again, the southeast corner, looking into the property, looking westward, kind of south, or excuse me, looking northwest. This is what you presently see. This is what you would see with the evergreens that would go around the property. Next slide, please. This is the neighbors that are their home, what we did, and we did not trespass. We just went behind into the commons area where the walking trail is, and from their fence, we took a picture, and this is what we proposed that we could do to really help to mitigate, you know, the sight, the line of sight, and so forth in that area. These evergreen trees also make a significant difference in terms of sound. They truly do. Could you go to the next slide, too? So there's been a lot of mistruths and things. At one point at the City Council meeting, someone got up and said, you know, before Puffer came onto the property, this fence was in perfect condition, and now look what he's done. And they showed pictures of, or maybe elaborated, that we're destroying the fence. Can you show the next picture, please? But in reality, these pictures were taken several years before we even bought the property. We have no reservation whatsoever in in fixing the fence. We just, again, we moved quickly. It got into winter, we got into spring, and then all of a sudden, hell broke loose, and it's like, my gosh, are we even going to be here? Do we want to spend money installing trees? Do we want to spend money putting in a sprinkler system to keep the dust down? Do we want to do these things, or should we just wait and explain what we would like to do, which we truly would do? But this fence would be repaired appropriately. But again, it was a mistruth. In fact, even at the Planning Commission, somebody got up and said that as of recently as just a few weeks ago, they were dumping rocks, which was not true, and it was breaking the fence. Next picture, please. In fact, this was another mistruth. In fact, one of the gentlemen who spoke here tonight indicated, in fact, let me just grab my notes. He said that there was a petition that went out of over 100, and I think the number was 186 names, if I'm not mistaken. And at 186 names, he said that they all signed this petition in opposition of me. And I say, in opposition of what? Because anyone would be against something if you're telling them mistruths. So this fellow indicates right here on this date that on Thursday, May 25th, he's
Mr.
going
Puffer,
to be...
and just in fairness, I mean, a private Facebook message from one individual to a neighborhood, I mean, if you would like to introduce this, I'm not sure it's probably valid or a good idea, but I would certainly have to give both the neighborhood and Mr. Pierce an equal opportunity to defend themselves.
The reason I feel like it's important is because my integrity has come up here by the things he has said tonight, in indicating that, you know, they've got this 186 families that have signed this petition, but it's based on falsehoods. Because what he's doing, Mayor, is he has suggested that I'm building a building on this property, and that the people need to rally to stop the building process. In fact, he goes into detail and states something to the effect that he has seen, or is it?
Our packet in May said that there was going to be a structure built, just to help maybe you understand why folks felt that way. We could pull the packet and bring it, it's on the internet, we could pull it up right now.
Okay, I'm just telling you that when people are misled, then what happens is they can...
Well, then you misled.
No, I didn't.
Okay, let's Mr. Buffer, the council can
Okay.
vote against what I'm going to recommend, but let's move from the slide.
Okay.
I don't see how this
It's also been told that I bring in big trucks, and I heard that tonight, and I'd like to show you the biggest truck that we typically have in and out of that property. The only time that when we have had a bigger truck than this is when we're moving in major property. I don't know how familiar the council is on vehicles, but most of our vehicles are either half-ton, three-quarter-ton, or one-ton trucks. And so there's kind of an assertion that we have like these big 10-wheeler trucks, and I just wanted to show so that you get a very good perspective in terms of the size of truck that we actually have. And you may have seen them because, again, we're here in... So these are the trucks that we're talking about.
But you do have an 18-wheeler?
Oh, yeah, but it's...
With a transporter? That's the one that was photoed before, right? That's yours?
I'm also very concerned that if I lived in an environment like that and had a very dusty atmosphere, it'd be terrible. And so I'd made the recommendation, we've talked about this for a while now, of putting in a sprinkler system that would water the gravel that we have there so that, and it would periodically turn on with a timer so that we would eliminate the potential for dust. In summary, as you look across the street, we have light industrial. We look to the north, we have light industrial. You look at part of this property, at least the hillside that the city owns, it is light industrial. It seems to me it makes sense that this property would really fit well to be light industrial, you most certainly could not build a home on this property. In terms of safety issues or issues that residents have, we are very, very sensitive about making sure that the homeowners and those who live in the area are safe. We would take every measure possible. If it's the council's recommendation to put in a fence, we would put in a fence. The fact is we're there on an average of no more than 10 times per day, which is about the average of a normal homeowner. The statistics that we did on the weeks and I had nothing to do with picking the weeks, but we're there an average of between 6 and 9 times per week. So when they say there's a lot of traffic, it's most certainly not Jim Puffer landscape. It would be my hope that the council would take everything that's been said tonight into consideration. I personally believe that this is a good fit. However, if the council disagrees, I will respectively move and find another location. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Puffer, thank you for that summary. My sense is we could probably have a lot of discussion back and forth. I want to give the council just each an opportunity. Maybe Councilmember Page, we'll start with you I don't necessarily want to time the council, but maybe 3 or 4 minutes to maybe, if you have questions, summary, then great. But maybe we can have an orderly opportunity.
All right, just some observations. First of all, I just want to recognize everyone for coming out. It really is incredible. And what a blessing to be in a society we can actually do that. You know, when we talk about land use issues, there's nothing more important. Where I live up on the east side, close to Highway 89, we're going through this now with the state on the expansion of Highway 89. The difference is many of my neighbors have a good potential of losing their homes, and many of them who have trees and grass and wonderful things are going to end up having a road right by their house, depending on what the state decides to do. So these things do affect us, and I agree. I understand that. First of all, on that planning commission, 2.5 hours. You know, I listened to it on the way down to St. George, and I asked Susan Lee to take my place, and she thanked me for days afterwards for allowing her to go to that meeting. I want you to know that I listened to it again, and I guess as painful as that is, I wrote down the things that I think that were the concern of the citizens. And I have this here. I think one thing is there was quite a few complaints about the dust. There was complaints about the noise and also the times of operation. Street safety was a big issue. Trucks pulling on the road. What kind of trucks? Dirt tracked onto the street. Public safety for materials stored on site was another concern. Negative impact on neighborhood translate to property values. That was one of the issues, and all these were addressed tonight as well. The quality of life issue. And as it stands, and I think Mr. Puffer has done quite a bit in the last couple weeks to make some changes. I guess here's the questions I have. Will changing the zoning improve the situation, or will it diminish it? And the reason I say this is this. I lived in a home where I was trying to sell a home, and I had a vacant lot that became a dumping ground for everybody in the subdivision. You never want to be the last lot in there. And because of that, I mean, there was concrete, there was weeds, they couldn't mow because of all the problems. People were dumping asphalt, garbage, everything else. I asked Mr. Puffer what the lot was like, and some of the HOA members as well, and I guess there was some issues there, and he did clean that up. I guess the thing I want to ask too is, can a development agreement, will it improve the property from what it is right now? And I guess we'll have to make that decision. If zoning is denied, what then? I guess that's my question. Will Mr. Puffer be required to pull off or scale back? And my concern is who makes that decision, and where's the process in this? My personal opinion is I believe it can be mitigated, these problems and these situations. And I think that through a development agreement, and I think that if the city enforces it, I think it can be done. And but I think that development, the agreement that's in there right now, it needs to be more specific. It needs to probably have a few more things added to it to make sure these things are done. And one of the things I'd like to see is a timetable on that as well when these things are actually accomplished. So that's some of my thoughts.
Okay, Chris, from Mr. Snow.
Thank you, Mayor. So a lot of the email traffic that has been coming our way over the course of the last couple of months has involved allegations, I guess you could say, or at least assertions that, and we heard some tonight about staff, giving their blessing or a gentleman's agreement, or call it what you will. Some have called it a backroom deal or whatever. I'd like, if possible, to get staff's perspective on what transpired, what was said, what was not said, and hope to clear the air a little bit so that there's less, hopefully, misunderstanding about and misconstruing of words about really what was said and that Mr. Puffer could do if he purchased the property and so on and so forth. I'd just like to hear that perspective. Is that okay, Mayor?
Sure, if that's your question. Back about a year ago, I had a phone call from, as was mentioned, from Mr. Bruff asking, and I think Mr. Puffer as well about the same time, asking what could be done on this property. They indicated they'd like to store some landscape supplies. I maybe should have pursued that further to find out more details. Mr. Puffer did indicate he was moving the business from what was over on near the Tri-City property. I probably wasn't 100% clear what was Tri-City's items and what was Mr. Puffer's items. Based on the description as I understood it, it appeared that it was nothing that would be out of the ordinary for even a residential area. I get asked these kind of questions every day. It's left to my discretion. Clearly, in some cases, I err being too conservative, and sometimes I err to be too liberal. But I make these kind of decisions all the time. I use my best judgment based on the information I'm given, and I give an opinion that this would work or this would not work on a piece of property. I don't know that I'd ever talked to Mr. Puffer prior to him inquiring about this property and the use that could be placed there. I may have, as he does work in the city, but there's certainly no relationship there between me or, to my knowledge, any of the staff. We just merely took the information of the inquiry, used our best judgment, and gave him an indication that yes, that would be appropriate use. I do recall saying to both Mr. Bruff and Mr. Puffer, if the use grows to a point where it's too big for that property, then we would have to do something to bring it back into compliance. From that point, he bought the property, began to use it as a location for storage materials. Probably should be noticed, this is not his place of business. You can argue he's conducting business off the site, but it is not his business location. As it began to grow and he began to develop the site, Mr. Gibson, our zoning administrator, noticed that it was getting bigger and more impactful, and so he contacted Mr. Puffer and said, this is getting to the point, maybe we ought to do something and look at it, especially if you want to continue to grow there. it would probably be appropriate to rezone it. Most appropriate zone would be the light industrial zone. That allows for everything you would like to do. You can see on the map that light industrial is in the area. It would just be an expansion of that zone that already exists. And so that's when he submitted that application at prompting of the staff, and that's where it got us to this point.
Okay,
Does
so
that answer the questions, or is there more?
I think so. I think in general, you know, because a lot has been said that there was an agreement, that there was some kind of assertions made or an agreement made that he could go and do whatever it was he was going to do, and that the city, it's even been asserted that the city would turn a blind eye or basically just, you know, give a wink to it. So based on the information provided to you at the time that either Mr. Puffer or his agent conversed with you about the potential use of the property, it seemed like it was a reasonable use of the property under certain limitations.
Yes.
Is that an
correct.
accurate assessment of what you've just said? Okay, thank you. So my next question, you know, deals with this issue of the development agreement. That certainly the development agreement that's before us here, I agree with Mr. Page. I think it needs some more detail in it if it is to be approved. Some additional things to be added to it, but my question would be about enforcement. And that might be something that I would be interested in seeing detail in the development agreement and enforcement mechanism, and what might be available. I don't know what kinds of enforcement mechanisms there are that could be put there, but I think that does need to be there. Not that I think anyone has any expectation that Mr. Puffer specifically or any other property owner generally would try to circumvent or get around it or whatever. I certainly don't think that I try to believe the best in people before they give me a reason to believe the worst in them. But I think it would be just to make sure that the expectations are clear. I think that's something that could be added to the development agreement and enforcement mechanism if that was if the council so chooses to go that route. I think it's interesting, Mr. Puffer, I appreciated in his presentation that he demonstrated the easements, that at least the major easement, the Jordan Valley Water District has on the property, and it sounds like there are a number of other easements and encumbrances on this property. What happens to the property? If Mr. Puffer does leave, this property goes back to what it was before. It was technically open space in the homeowners association of the Old Mill Village subdivision, but it was not maintained open space. It was a weed patch, essentially. What happens to that property? Is there anything realistically that could ever happen with the property outside of, you know, should the rezone not happen?
I'm not familiar with those easements. We don't typically get into private easements between outside entities and private property owners. The high-pressure gas line runs across the property. That easement was shown on the original subdivision plat. Other than that, I'm not aware if those easements exist or not, and frankly, it's not our business to worry about that. The entities that own the easement control what can be done within their easement. We're probably aware what was portrayed was the water district easement. They own most of these lots have crossed here. The intent is at some point they're going to build a water line. Their approach was it's cheaper for them to buy the property, sit on it, install the line, and then sell the property with the easement so they didn't have to dig through backyards. Whether in 20 or 40 years or whenever that pipeline goes in, they may reduce the amount of easement on this piece of property in a like fashion, and it may be able to be something done with it at that point. Prior to that, it's their call on what can be done on the property. My expectation would be things of a permanent nature would probably be difficult to get approved by them.
Okay. And maybe this question is more for Mr. Gibson than for you, Andy. What is our current process for enforcement of zoning infractions or violations or possible violations?
I can handle that one as well.
You want to handle that one too, Andy?
For the most part, we work on a complaint basis. If we become aware that there is a violation or a concern that it's a violation, then we investigate it and take appropriate action. We don't typically go out specifically looking for violations.
Should we?
When you tell us to.
If this body were to tell you to, I guess that would be a different...
That would be a change in philosophy that the council would pass down to the staff.
Mr. Scott, are there other cities in the state of Utah that have a more robust enforcement mechanism for zoning infractions?
Certainly there are, yes.
And from your experience and in talking with other city administrators and whatnot, how has that gone for those communities?
I think a community of our size typically would have a full-time code enforcement officer, one maybe. My experience has been mostly in southern Utah, where I've seen code enforcement taken very seriously. I'm thinking mostly of St. George. I've seen a change in attitude there with certain enforcement practices that have been very, very intense at times, and then very, very less intense at other times as people have kind of pushed back against that. I think Mr. Thompson explained our position very well. We do put a lot of respect in for private property, for what people can do on their private property, but at the same time we have a duty to ensure that those that are around that private property also have a right to quiet enjoyment and those other items.
Sure. I guess what I'm getting at is that there's been a lot of talk about over the last couple of months about how the city has been. I think there's many people who have indicated the city's been negligent in its duty to enforce. I certainly think that there's room to interpret it that way. If people would like to have the city have more full-time employees or an employee to go out and actively do that more, I guess that's something that we could entertain doing as a council. Although I think in general we tend to live in a community that's a little bit more conservative. I would say a lot more conservative probably than most, that would not like the idea of having their individual use and their property monitored more closely. So there is that as a concern as well, that I in a lot of the discussions, a lot of the email traffic, a lot of the perspectives that have been brought to bear on this, I think that's been one of the arguments, and certainly the city could get much more aggressive on proactively enforcing zoning. But that means we get people out looking at your personal property uses much more closely, and I'm not sure that we live in a community where people are really excited about that. And so this is a balancing act as far as that's concerned. Those are some of the thoughts that have been going through my mind. I'll yield time to the next council member.
Since we're going down the line, I'm just going to take 1 second and maybe share a couple of quick thoughts from my perspective. Even though I don't get a vote, you get to hear from me. Just a couple of things. The comment was made earlier by, from a couple of people, that we need to do better as a society, to be more cordial, to be more civil, and I couldn't agree more. I think any time, and I'm not alleging that anything has taken place here because I haven't been privy to it firsthand, but certainly any time we are anything less than respectful or civil to one another, I think that is a tragedy. To Mr. Adams' point earlier in the May City Council meeting, in the staff report, under description in the third paragraph, second sentence, it did indeed say he would ultimately like to have a building on the site to store certain materials that are more prone to theft. I feel like I at least needed to point that out, that Mr. Adams' comment was accurate, that was included in a previous report. Whether or not that's applicable to the context and the message that was shared, I don't profess to know. But there are a couple of things I feel like I want to point out, at least have the council consider. Threats to the applicant, whether or not they did or did not take place, are not a reason to grant a rezone, nor are they a reason to deny a rezone. A lawsuit to the HOA, which my personal opinion really isn't applicable here, but I think is unfortunate, is also not a reason to grant or to deny a rezone request. A couple of weeks ago, I received a message that said, you either need to tell us how you're going to vote or you may be included. I don't think that should be a reason. A phone call between the applicant and the city is not a reason to grant or deny. Mr. Puffer, I have very limited experience. I think we've probably talked on the phone twice in the past 10 years for a variety of items, and I think it's probably been 4 or 5 years since I've talked to him or met with him. It seems like a very nice individual. I have no reason to question him or to question his intent. I would have to say, just in general, meeting with the HOA and getting their blessing, as he indicated, and then the perceived blessing by the city is probably troublesome to me, in that I don't know that we'll ever know what really took place in that conversation, what was alluded to that would be appropriate or be acceptable or not. But I would say it's always best to get it in writing. In the last 10 years, I'm probably a bit paranoid, and even our new city manager will attest to this as we talk about different issues, not about this, but just in general that come to the city, and say, well, we've been told that this works, and I've always said, get that person to put it in an email or in a letter for us, and oftentimes it doesn't always come back that way. I do think that's probably a best practice in this case. I don't believe for 1 second that there's anyone on the council that wants to grant a rezone to cover the city's action. I don't believe that's the case, but I strongly believe that should have no bearing whatsoever on the city council's decision tonight. The two other things I would just say, the difference maybe between an unsightly piece and a piece that has some maximum impact. I think some of the pictures I've seen are rather unsightly. The LDS Church had, before they built the pasta mill, stored all of their granite from the conference center on that site, and I hated it. Every time I drove by, I thought, that is so ugly, big piles of granite right off the freeway on-ramp. Can't they do something about that? They weren't coming and going. It was unsightly, and so as I try and think of what conversations staff might have had, if you move something onto a site versus running a business, I don't know what the conversation was, but I do see how there could maybe have been some misinterpretation or misunderstanding. But even if the city, and I don't believe it did, but even if the city totally misrepresented or totally misspoke, if the staff represented that something could be done that isn't legal to be done, I don't think that should have any bearing on our decision tonight. I think if indeed there was something that was misrepresented, which again I don't believe there was, I think we should make the zoning decision independent of that representation and then take our licks on the other issues completely separate, if indeed they did take place. I like what Councilmember Page said and what's going to happen next, and Mr. Tarbach spoke to some of the issues the other HOA have been dealing with, which probably is what troubles me about the lawsuit even more. But it's been a long road to try and recoup from some of the impacts that a previous developer had on that subdivision. I think there was good intent here from the HOA, from the other HOA. I think there was good intent here from the city. I also think as you look at collaboration, I think the council needs to be super sensitive to drastically changing a use. And what I mean by that is, for 10 years now, I've sat here and had people and heard people come and say, I bought that and I knew it was going to be some kind of business, but I didn't know it was going to be that business. And I'm sympathetic to that and say, yeah, absolutely, I totally get it. Open space, to light industrial is a little more of a drastic departure in my mind. And it has nothing to do with Mr. Puffer, has nothing to do with his integrity, has nothing to do with what he intended. But for me, it's really two issues. The use, what it was initially intended for, was indeed open space, not even houses. Obviously, we've already discussed that it can't be built, but it was intended as open space. Departing from that, I have an issue with. And then second, even though I don't believe, I choose not to believe that was his intent, there is a little bit of a concern I have from just even the perception of rezoning something that, whether it was obtained appropriately or not, rezoning something to accommodate a use that has already began, I do think could paint a little bit of a sticky situation. That's almost secondary to me. For me personally, I think departing from the planned open space to a light industrial use, even as has been suggested, is a little beyond what I hope the council considers.
Well, I won't bore all of you. A lot of what's been said already are several things that I wanted to talk about, and I really appreciate how well spoken the mayor was in laying out exactly what's become and what's happened with this property. It's been a terrible situation for that HOA and what they've had to deal with. And for the city to work with them to try and rectify the problem is so appreciative for not only the HOA people, but for the open space that was left without any funds to complete it. And so I can see where that effort was made to make that happen. But with that being said, I do want you all to know that I tried to make an effort to go out and walk among your neighborhood and talk with each one of you individually. And there were some I wasn't able to get, you weren't home. But I wanted to do it because I wanted to hear directly from you the impact that you were feeling from this decision that we have before us tonight. And it's something that as a councilwoman I take very serious. I do listen to the people. There's been several issues in the city that have come before us where it is a zoning change, and as a council, it's we're open-eared to listening to you. And with that being said, Mr. Puffer is a good man, and this whole issue with the mean-spiritedness of what was done, not by all of you, but by a handful of you, I felt very disappointed with it. And I would hope going forward that we have learned a lot from this and know that when we have these kind of issues come before the city, that we can do it in a spirit of let's take this to the council and not bombard each other with the hatefulness and the disrespectfulness. I think a lot more can be accomplished and much more can be done in that manner. And with that being said, I won't continue, but I do appreciate what's been said and much of what I wanted to say, so thank you.
I have nowhere to begin to cut the tension in this room other than a joke by a personal favorite, J. Golden Kimball. It was mentioned earlier, northeast, southwest, by someone at the pulpit of light industrial being all around this area. And what's sad is that you go northeast, southwest, and there's residential all around this area. And it's like cooking a frog when we continue to allow ourselves to go down one path because it feels comfortable, because it's not that hot, other than this is hotter than hell in here tonight. You know, figuratively and literally, you know, should have worn my swimming suit. But J. Golden Kimball was approached by a man who said, you know, I am so sick and tired of all these Mormons I can't get away from. And J. Golden Kimball said, or the guy said, I've gone north, east, south, or west, and I can't get away from them. And Jay says, well, have you gone to hell? Try going there. There aren't any Mormons there. You know, but there's got to be a way to cut through the thick in here. I don't think that this issue is about who's nice and who's naughty. You know, we are bigger than that. And we have a right to be nice, and we have a right to be naughty. We absolutely do. If we didn't, if the human spirit didn't have a right to stand up and voice
and in anger, when they feel like they've been living in a padded room and no one is listening nor communicating with them properly, they have a right to stand up. And you cannot contend with the fight in the human spirit, or we would still be under Mother Britain's rule. If George Washington was faced with some of these similar things, we would still pay taxes to Britain. We must uphold. This is not about anyone personally. This is not about, oh, somebody made a naughty comment. Oh, let me tell you about naughty comments, for hell's sake. Many of you in this room have delivered so many naughty comments to me, it damn near has put me 6 feet under. So don't come here and act like any of you who are feeling so bad for anyone. You've all delivered a naughty comment in your life, so I don't think it's about that. I have a lot of questions, and since Councilmember Snell took 13 minutes, I asked for the same liberty. This is not about being naughty or nice. I'd like to know, as I looked in the pictures, where's the garbage that is attested? I've drove out there, I've developed out there, I've been out in West Kaysville for 20 years. I don't ever recall that lot becoming a landfill prior to this. I don't think that's a selling point, so I throw that one out. Neither the open space, what was wrong with the grasses that were there? I don't think that's an issue either. It wasn't very displeasing to the eye, and it controlled the dust. Okay, I text, okay, in response to, I know you're speaking to me when you're at the pulpit, Mr. Puffer, and I know you're upset over the last council meeting. I wasn't trying to belittle you. I looked at the camera, I says, Jim, I call you Puff Daddy. This is not about you. I think you took it wrong. I actually want to say I am sensitive, and I do have voicemails from you, as you know, and we also have, I think, about 4 quotes from all the men who stood on behalf of you, and this is where I have sympathy and empathy for you. The voicemails and the quotes all congruently state that you were very deliberately told by the city of Kaysville you could do what you did. Honestly, I have empathy for that. I do. And I think you might have a stake there to say something, but I wonder if the politics are keeping that from coming to light. Nobody wants to really touch upon that. Yeah, we talked about how this community can do better. It needs to do better. You know, we need to have clear-cut policies, and we've heard tonight, as Councilmember Snell asked Andy, what is our enforcement of these kind of issues? Well, we heard that we do it post-actively. You know, why aren't we doing preventative in the city? And so if post-active is the way we do our enforcement, reactive enforcement, then why are we not considering reactive zoning here and saying, no, this is fruit of a poison tree. Nobody perhaps had ill intentions of meaning it to go that way, but it's gone there, and it's caused a huge problem in our community, and it's opened up a great divide for a precedence that absolutely could come flooding in hereafter. This affects more than just the folks who live by this property. This affects anyone who lives in the city of Kaysville. Why? Because if this happens here tonight, I encourage Steve Mitchell, I saw him tonight. I encourage Jeff Peterson, they live down there, and I encourage any other business who has felt ostracized and ran out of their zones for whatever reason they were ran out, who came through front doors, got conditional use permits. I'm not implying anything. I honestly, if I were told the things that you were told, Jim, you know, I probably would have done the same thing. You know, I would have felt like, okay, these are the code guys and the engineering guys, and they're saying this works. I get it. You know, but I think Jeff Peterson should have a right to waltz in here in a couple of weeks and say, I want to open my mechanic shop again. I'm struggling to feed my family. That fed my family. I want to open it again. And I threw out an idea last time. We're throwing out all these ideas how to make this work for Jim. I think it's wonderful, this development agreement idea. But, okay, so why can't Jeff Peterson, who Susan Lee has attested to many of you, well, that was thrown out because he didn't live in the property anymore. He didn't live in the home, so he violated the zoning. Well, then why can't Jeff get a 5% owner in his company and allow them to live in the home in front of his shop, and now he's in compliance, and now he can go back to operating and fixing vehicles on his property? Why wasn't he allowed that? Here tonight, we were looking at allowing something that never came through a proper channel. I'm not saying that's by intent or purposely by design, negligence perhaps, I don't know. Andy, you know, you and I have a great friendship. But another point, I've got an email from Andy today where he says that he has no reason to believe this lot is not buildable. We have sold many lots to Jordan Valley Water, and I don't understand. I would like this to have some, I'd like that to be investigated if Jordan Valley really would or would not allow a home to be built on that. So I think there are a lot of points here. I'd like to know how the neighbors felt 2 years ago when the previous council up here changed their backyards to LI. You know, there are many, now I'm speaking to everyone who is in the OMV village. How did you guys feel when they did that to your backyards? When you had asphalt and concrete? We heard some of your neighbors in Planning Commission, they were very ticked about it. You know, was there proper notice given then? Why do we keep in this rut? Are we trying to do things with the path of least resistance? Because the end result of that is this. We end into the path of most resistance. You know, we need to communicate better, but those folks are upset that's there. Why don't we flip-flop it? You know, why don't we have the city buy this land and go and allow Jim to go over in the OMV's literal backyards? They can't see this because Old Mill Drive or whatever is such a big berm up. They can't see it or hear it. They don't know it's there. But everyone else on the other side can. I think as far as the way that both parties feel, I'm trying to understand both sides. I get the OMV village people. I understand, but you know, you guys have something to gain. You know, you're looking for your open space, you're looking for some money, you're looking for all these things. Perhaps a 1.5 acre parcel though could have been sold for a little bit more money than what it was sold, and maybe you guys could have, you know, actually gone a little further with your money. You know, maybe Jordan Valley Water would have been interested. I don't know, I can't speak to all that. But the lawsuit, throwing out that it is such a tragedy that there's a lawsuit filed. I think the people on that side of the coin feel like they're not listened to, and they feel like their rights have not been protected. You know, didn't long ago George Washington essentially hurl a lawsuit over to Great Britain? You know, when the tea was dumped in the harbor, didn't we just instigate no more? And as we could go on and present more issues where we have kind of, as a council, I feel bad for the council too, I really do. We've been caught in the crosshairs, and I don't think that we should be in these crosshairs. You know, I think that this should have been remedied and through a proper process long ago. This is a difficult thing. I don't think that we have the right to allow ourselves to be cornered into a zoning scenario. You know, I don't think it's our responsibility to take care of the OMV village's problems, although we could be empathetic and help them look for solutions. We've tried before, we've bought their property before. You guys have, everyone in here. Your tax dollars have bought their land to appease them. That's happened in other HOAs. There's a West Kaysville HOA that has a 1.5-ish acre detention basin that the city actually went in and filled it in because they were tired of the mosquitoes and whatnot. You know, so when is the equestrian HOA going to come in and get a whole lot of beautification to their open spaces from the city tax dollar? It's not our obligation to deal with HOAs. It's not necessarily our problem. And I don't see it our problem to help remedy private businesses' issues. So I think the issues here are extensive. I don't think that this body, Councilmember Page said he didn't know who had the right to deny or approve it. Well, we do. And every party involved so far that has led it to here, the body that does have the authority, does not have the authority.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of good comments have been made. I don't want to repeat those or take longer than I need to. I was trying to think of what could I add that would add some value or that was somewhat new. And I think through this process, I've written quite a few emails, and the one consistent thing for me, and maybe it comes from my Planning Commission experience, is to try and stick to the rules and the facts and circumstances and decide the issue before us. And the point's been made by virtually everyone, I think, that really a lot of these other side issues are not really important to the issue of what the ultimate zone of the property would be. And I would add that probably one more thing that shouldn't be, let's say for sake of argument, that a separate issue, that the zone, that the business owner outgrew the zone and there was a compliance violation, then I believe the city does have the ability to enforce that or even to exact some kind of a fine or a penalty. But I understand I definitely agree with what the mayor said, that you don't want to have the slippery slope where someone gets a business in place in a zone that's not allowed, and then eventually there's a complaint from the citizenry with our little laid-back approach. By the way, if we had a code enforcement, we'd have to have a budget line item, but clearly the council can decide to do that and figure out how to prioritize that if we wanted to do it. But once that complaint is filed, then some enforcement action needs to take place, and it should. But I guess I would argue that it's in the judgment. It's not. So when you're making the zoning decision, you still make the zoning decision based on the property and the facts and circumstances of the use on that property and whether it comports with the general plan and ordinances and the judgments that you make there. In this case, we've got a development agreement, and then you handle the other enforcement issue separately. So the key thing is the judgment, because a council person could say, for example, our land use authority in making the decision, well, we feel bad for the business owner because he's already spent all this money and therefore we better approve it. No, that's certainly not a reason either. So you have to so through all of this, I think what I've tried to do is say, what are the facts and circumstances and how does it comport with this use, the surrounding uses? Is there a buffer zone? Can the negative impacts be mitigated? And I would like to share just personal experience. So, you know, that I've told people when I was running for office too that I may not always agree with you, and some people think that listening means that, you know, you always agree with everything that's said, and that's what listening means. I don't think so. I think listening means you're heard, but you may have a different approach. But one thing I do agree with is I think we all understand, and I'll share a personal experience in a moment, we all understand the feeling of something new coming in that could negatively impact our homes, where we live, our property values, our safety, the safety of our children. I really understand that as a fundamental human thing, and no one should ever apologize for that feeling at all. But the question is, when we look at it in context, for example, there's a lot of construction vehicles going by and other vehicles, and if this is adding 8 to 10, similar to a home, then at least the volume is not significant for that standpoint. And then you look at other things, and I'll give the personal example real quickly. Probably the reason I'm sitting here, a lot of people think, you know, I was 57 before I finally decided. Actually, my father being in politics was probably the reason why I never ran, even though I was always interested. I've never missed a vote since I was 18. But I thought of all that sacrifice, I would rather be with my family than I would run for office. But it was actually a zoning issue close to my home. That's probably why I was sitting here today. Because the Smith's Marketplace is within about 120 feet of my house. And so in 2004, when we first moved there, I checked everything: liquefaction, how high is it, what's the potential for flood. So I'd looked at a lot of things before we bought the property. I wasn't told about the Bear River pipeline until after, so I actually have an easement, 30-foot easement going through my property as well. And anyway, I won't divulge, or divert into that too much, but so when I heard there was going to be maybe a large shopping complex, I thought, well, gosh, I didn't consider that. I thought maybe there would be homes there. And so I and a lot of my neighbors organized just like you have, and I was concerned. My property values, you know, what about noise? What about safety? And all these different issues. And so I got very involved in that process. And I think Council Member Snell, I met with him and had lunch. He was serving on the council at the time. And I think you remember that I always tried to be respectful, but I was very concerned about, you know, what might happen to my property values, safety, all those issues. And so to fast forward a little bit, then we had the financial crisis in 2007 and 8, and that kind of delayed. It was rezoned for commercial to allow that property to go in, but it was delayed because of the financial crisis, probably, and the developers, Smiths or whoever, it was not an optimal time to build that. So to this day, I still prefer that maybe it would have gone somewhere else rather than next to my home, because now instead of 8 to 10 cars, we have hundreds of extra cars every day that come and go. But at some point I realized, and by this point I was serving on the Planning Commission, I have no authority to stop this at this point. And as I started to look at it, I realized from the community's perspective, not mine personally, it makes sense to have this here because it's on 200 North and Flint Street. It's sort of about as central as you can get on two major streets for the whole west side services. And the other thing is, I couldn't stop it, so I thought, what can we do to mitigate the impacts? To kind of let you know how I think about some of these things. What can we do to mitigate? So they did a lot of things like building the stone wall and raising it up a little bit instead of it was 8 for 6 feet, and we looked at it to make sure that the headlights wouldn't hit any of the homes across the trail, about the same distance as this would be from your homes. And they were going to use this new LED downward-facing lights that had never been used in Utah before, and they are amazingly effective. Actually, the side lights on the building create more throw-out light. The lights that go down into the parking lot create virtually no throw-out light. It's amazing. But the safety lights create some light. And, you know, it created a lot of extra traffic, but the city worked and got a crossing guard for the or a crossing light and striped crossing walk across for the students that go to Centennial Junior High along there, and I use that bike path, and I drive past your homes a lot, or ride past with my bike on the trail, and have been there many times looking at it, trying to assess the impact. But I guess my point is that we did mitigate many of the, you know, safety concerns, and since then, you know, many other businesses have gone in right across the street. The light industrial park is 1 block from my home. You just go up and it's there. But I have to tell you this, in the long run, some of the things, I had my home appraised, and this is neither here nor there because it's anecdotal, but I'll just share this. So I had my home appraised. It had gone up by the same value that all the other homes that are further away from the Smiths complex had. So it didn't have the impact on my home value that I thought it would have. And also, I have to stand in my front yard and listen, and sometimes the refrigerated trucks, when they come in, because I have on the back side, so the refrigerated trucks will come in. And when they're running their compressors, you can still hear it. But so we talked about that, and Miss says, okay, no problem. We'll make sure that they turn off their compressors and hook into the building, you know. So I'm not saying that, I just share that with you, and I apologize for being so long-winded, to let you know that I do understand the fundamental concern. But we also have to look at highest and best use, and frankly, landscaping business. Who doesn't have a home that's landscaped? So as far as the business, a lot of you have asked the question, how does this add to the city? Well, how does any business add to the city? The general plan also says that businesses should be located throughout the community, but, you know, the buffer zones mitigation, that's very important too. And someone read the general plan, that actually comes, this is David Church. So a lot of that's based, and this book is for all cities and towns in Utah, and that exact language that's in that part that was read of the ordinance comes from this, and it's for every city. But not only does it say the aesthetics, and it does mention protect the tax base, it does mention protect property values. I just wanted to mention that briefly. That's property values in general. So when you're planning your community, if you look at Kaysville, it has higher property values than other communities because we do have less commercial. We're largely a residential bedroom community, but we do have to have some tax base, and we do have to have some services for our residents. But it also says in here to foster the state's agricultural and other industries. So, you know, I would argue a business that provides landscaping services, I don't have any preference between one business or another. So some of those concerns aren't really. So to boil all this down, it seems that the property to me, in my view, other than open space, which you could maintain it as sort of a park-like thing, I acknowledge that point that the mayor made, that you could have it be sort of an open space park-like thing if an HOA would agree to take that and maintain it. Otherwise, it would probably become a vacant lot. I guess different assessments on what weeds would be like. But I think if the negative, so my position from the beginning is if the negative impacts to neighbors can be mitigated adequately, not just an attempt, but if the trees, the sound wall, even one thing that I was thinking about, safety, you know, is alignment of the road. That hasn't necessarily been addressed, but, or even with dust, and also being able to pull out, if part of that could be paved. I can't imagine that would be that expensive, so that you're not tracking mud onto the main road. And maybe, you know, more of it can be paved, maybe more gravel can be brought in, that in combination with the sprinkling system. So I certainly think that Mr. Puffer has made a good faith effort in talking, and the development agreement addresses many of these things to mitigate the impact. So if we can get that property to a point, if the developer owner can get it to the point where it wouldn't have negative impacts. And the one part I would disagree with the mayor a little bit, because the development agreement runs with the property and restricts the use to a landscaping business, even though the commercial zone that is right next to my house is not a light industrial, I would certainly argue that the impacts on traffic, safety, noise, sight, everything is more significant than what this would be. There's a lot more traffic, even though it's a commercial zone. So I think we can't generalize too much. We have to look at every individual situation and judge what the impacts are. And I agree with Councilman Page that probably the impacts can be mitigated in this point. We just to this thing, and I'm not objecting to maybe having some enforcement mechanism in there as well, so that it runs with the land. The risk is that a future city council would undo it, right? But I believe that's the only way that it could be undone, is if another light industrial use were to come in and Mr. Puffer were to decide to sell his property, that a future city council could unwind the development agreement. So that is a possibility, but again, that would go through a public process at that point. So I apologize for running on, but that's...
Chairman, may I?
Thank you. Yeah, if you'd like to take one more minute, sure.
Well, Jake, if I could, did Smith's move in and then get its zoning? Rhetorical. No, it didn't. It was zoned beforehand, and it was properly notified. People had a chance to come in. The city could perhaps make a parking lot out of where the landscape business is right now for the trail. That actually was thought of years ago, for people to park and use the trail right there. So there's other uses than just a home. And the funny thing is, a Smith's, and I think you're kind of leaving out in your property assessment, I'm sure an appraiser would agree with this, that the IHC hospital just north of you is also what drove up your property value. People like to live near those things. They don't like to live next to industrial, which is unsightly, uncontrollable, hard to manage. There's 3 quick points I left out earlier. I just wanted to say, Mr. Puffer, just to offer, you know, I did try to get a hold of you in November. I've let you know that. I'd like the people to know that. As a representative of you, I did text in November, and I said, hey, Jim, it looks like you're moving your whole yard over here off Burton Lane. Are you? And I never received a response. So I did try. Also, do we currently collect any revenues or rents for the land where you're currently, this is for the city manager, do we collect rent for where Mr. Puffer currently has equipment on city land? Let me help the people understand. You all know where the operations center is, the power, public works and all that.
Is this applicable to the rezone request though tonight? Because it sounds like maybe we're departing from the discussion regarding this property.
Well, I think it is to the people, because we're arguing, we're slamming these folks for saying, how dare you think that there's anything that's not 100% above board going on. Do we collect rent? Yes or no?
I don't know if I don't think we collect any rent from Mr. Puffer right now.
So ever since...
We never have, actually. Tri-City was who we leased land from, or leased land from us, excuse me.
Yeah, Tri-City held the lease, and then they sublet the lease to Puffer, and then the former administration had put out an eviction notice for everyone to vacate. So we didn't really, you know, I guess we threw Jim out, but I mean, their business is with Tri-City. So if there's a need, you know, maybe Tri-City should have helped try and relocate Puffer Landscaping. But I don't understand why for a year now, a company has been allowed to park their equipment for free on city land. That to me seems a little bit odd. And I think that is where some of the folks are saying, yeah, what is going on here? Why are we bending over backwards after the fact? Why can't we just simply uphold the zoning that we all know is in place? And why can't we trust our elected officials to uphold it even in the face of much adversity? And then a quick question. It was said, Mr. Puffer, you said that in the last week that you crushed the stone, correct? Did you have a crusher? Did you take it to Parsons, or where did you have that done?
I received permission from the city to move it across the street so that we can minimize the concern of pallets on that property. I paid the company after they were completely finished with what they were doing with the cities, making road base out of asphalt and gravel, and paid them to crush our stone.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm glad you paid.
I think we're departing the rezone discussion. Mr. Adams?
Was that offered to all people to use the city's crusher, though?
I don't think this has anything to do with the rezone request that we're trying to address tonight. If you'd like to ask Mr. Puffer any of his business decisions offline, then I think that would be just fine if he chooses to answer. But for this purpose, our discussion tonight is about the rezone and the merits of the rezone. So council, you've all had almost exact equal opportunity to chime in on this issue. I think we're probably either you have a couple of options. One option is to approve the rezone request and the development agreement as outlined. Another option is to table the item with and have some other type of direction. The third option is to just deny it, and I believe a fourth option is to rezone it something else, which I always thought was a weird option because that just seems like that would be a bad idea, but I think it's still an option. So those are your four options to consider.
Just have a brief comment on that. I'm almost leaning towards tabling for one reason, because I don't like to write on the fly in the development agreement or suggest any changes to it. I don't know, it would be a 2-week delay, but I'm wondering if we could explore, just have a little more time to look at it and see if we've covered all the mitigating factors that we would want to be in the.
Who wrote it?
Staff wrote it.
Okay. Has anyone on this dais up here met with Puffer Landscaping this week? I heard that 2 council members did to go over this agreement. Who met with them?
I walked
You
the
did?
project.
You and who else?
And I did also. Yeah.
And discuss the development agreement?
Nope. Nope.
We had talked that.
Now, the first I saw it was when I looked at on Monday, looked at the evening, or maybe after 4th of July, I can't remember for sure, but read through development agreement.
I just struggle a lot with the contrast to Jeff Peterson. The comment you made, I like the comment you made about how, we need to try and help all businesses, even beyond those that we collect taxes from, there's no taxes coming in from this.
Mayor, I would just make a point of order that I would prefer that Councilmember Adams not represent anything that I have said. So if he wants to make a point germane to the rezone or the motion before us, that's fine, but I would prefer that he not talk to me directly and put words in my mouth.
Thank you. So council, you have, as I mentioned.
I just finished the comment without, I don't think I put words in his mouth. So on the concept of looking out for all, I really struggle with Jeff Peterson and like Steve Mitchell with the free wedding barn, tossed aside, Kaysville residents. And, are there not cars that need to be fixed? I'll use David Church's words. David Church said in there that we should look out for agricultural uses and other industrial uses also, that we maybe don't collect revenue from it. Don't we all need landscaping, David Church said, but don't we all need vehicles fixed? And Jeff was given
again, I recognize you have a valid concern on that issue, or you have a concern on that issue, but it is not directly applicable to this item. So council, again, you have an option at this point to make a motion. I'll call for a motion, which is one of those, which I believe is one of those 4 options. There may be one outside of that, but I would certainly welcome a motion.
Prior to a motion, I got to make another additional comment, Mayor. I think most of the development agreement verbiage comes from the, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I got done telling Councilmember Adams, I think we've concluded with comments and would love to call for a motion. At some point, we have to ask for everyone to conclude their comments, and someone will
Fair enough.
want to have the last word. But I think it would be great just to call for a motion. And if we can have more discussion after the motion, that would be
okay. Well, then I will make a motion, Mayor, that we table the item pending further additions to to the development agreement to get more teeth into it and additional specificity into it for the course of 2 weeks.
I will second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Motion by Councilmember Snell and a second by Councilmember Garn to table the item till our next city council meeting, which I believe is in 2 weeks. And if I understood the motion, it was to direct staff to,
What?
Sorry, you'd like to clarify?
Yeah, can I clarify? I mean, I do think I'd like to take that time because the development agreement, I think largely right now is taken from the points that were discussed during the Planning Commission meeting, I believe. And that's great. There were there was a lot of discussion there, and there were some restrictions that were added. I think we've discussed several. There's been several points made tonight. Number one, I think an enforcement mechanism needs to be included. I think I would like the development agreement includes a screening fence requirement along the western property. I would like to see that include the southern property, wherever the property actually abuts an additional existing property owner. Further, the paving of the road I think is a great idea, or at least gravel. And I think there's some vague language there. I'd like to specify it a little bit more to specify the dust mitigation, noise mitigation, and some of the other, even the ingress and egress point on Burton Lane concerns that have been raised. I think getting some of those specifics into that's a very long, but I'm clarifying. Basically, that's what the direction I would provide for staff to bring back a development agreement that is more robust and has more of these things that I've just listed in it.
And if I could add one thing too, just to explore, not necessarily to put in, and that is one thing that was mentioned, which I'm very sensitive to, although again, it's a matter of degree. How does it impact safety? But something I hadn't thought of before until a resident had mentioned it, but some of the stones kind of stack high, and possibly children entering the property, and maybe climbing on it, and something tips over, and a tragedy occurs. I'm wondering if we might explore the possibility of having a fence encircle the property in some way to keep. I mean, anybody who's dedicated is going to get over the fence, right? You're going to put a 6 foot, unless you have barbed wire, which I'm not advocating.
I-15 sound.
But at least it sends a message. It says, okay, don't enter here. So that would be something to consider. I'm not saying that definitely has to be there, but access to the property and possibly ways to mitigate that risk.
I think there's a point, sorry, Mayor, very germane, if you don't mind, extremely germane.
If it's applicable to the motion,
Absolutely.
Then it would be.
Well, it's applicable to what's going on here, and it hasn't been brought up tonight. Where are you guys, it's obviously what you guys are doing here. Where are you considering drawing the west boundary of the LI? On the east, on Puffer's property line, or on the west side of the rail trail, which would back up to all these folks' homes? And what that would do is that means that a commercial building can be built in the future right on the property line, Puffer's property line. So where are we considering rezoning LI to? All the way through UTA's, all the way through the rail trail? Or are we moving LI just to his legal piece of property?
I believe that the request is specifically for his property, so would only be applicable for his property.
So it would not extend through the easement of the rail trail?
Not as I understand it, but I think it would have to specify that it included the rail trail, which I was going to say, I guess right now much of it's included in several different zones, but the rezone would stick with the property itself unless otherwise specified.
I'd be more than happy to entertain even inviting a portion of the development agreement that stipulates permanent structures are prohibited.
And I may just speak briefly to Councilman Adams' point. It was discussed with the Planning Commission as it pertained to the shed structure or whatever might be put on the property, where that line would go. So I think that they, I believe, discussed extending that as stated further west. Whether that's the will of the council or not is obviously up to the will of the council and your determination. But there is a stipulation within the LI zoning district that structures cannot be within 30 feet of a residential zoning district. And so to that end, the discussion was whether it was appropriate or not to extend it, partly or all the way across the trail.
So I won't try and summarize everything in Councilmember Snell's motion, but I think it's been relatively well at least reflected here, and it's going to require staff to maybe do some additional work. There was at this point it doesn't matter what I think about whether we should or should not, other than I would just again say, just because something is taking place or wanted doesn't mean we have to do it. And if we are going to do it, that's the process. I'll leave here tonight disagreeing with the direction we're making, but that's the process, and unfortunately it's not always how we want. But there was a comment made by Mr. Ferber earlier that I actually, initially when he was talking, I totally disagreed with him. Like, no, I don't really think this is an opportunity for everybody to, but in light of some of the motion, it would, I know that you open a little bit and the floodgates come, it would be interesting because I think much of the discussion has been, we don't want to concede to maybe, this is just my perception, we don't want to concede to what some mitigations might be because we just don't want it. And if the council's made a pretty clear indication that it's coming, it would be, whether that's a council representative or, and maybe I'm just opening a can of worms by recommending that, but it would be, or maybe just an invitation for as much as it may sting for some of you to give some feedback to council to share with staff. Councilmember Page's responsibilities include being liaison with community development and not to throw more, but I think he would be a good point person. I guess maybe to Mr. Ferber's, sorry, Seth, point, it may not be a bad opportunity to say, and be reasonable, but it may not be a bad opportunity to say, as long as you're going to do something, if the council's headed in that direction, some friendly recommendations may not hurt, or unfriendly, but recommendations may not hurt. So I just felt like I needed to say that. So we have a motion and a second to table with some direction and some uninvited commentary from me that has nothing to do with the motion, but just added. We will start a vote.
Opportunity for substitute?
You can always make a substitute, yes, but you just have to do it before I call for a vote, so go ahead.
Well, it's usually said. I'll make a substitute motion that,
actually never said.
That we, as the governing body with the authority sworn to us, that we uphold the zoning plan. And in a very gracious thank you to Mr. Puffer, he said it twice now, that he would very kindly, at the will of the people and the will of this body, very kindly go and find another location for his business. So I make a motion that we deny the zoning request and put this to rest for all parties and hope for the best for Mr. Puffer to find a location, and I'm confident he will, that suits the needs of his business, that's a proper place.
I think you have a substitute motion as outlined. Is there a second to the substitute motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a substitute motion to deny the rezone request by Councilmember Adams and a second by Councilmember Lee. We will vote on the substitute motion. Councilmember Garn, will you start a vote on the substitute motion?
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
Thank you. The substitute motion fails 3-2, which means we revert back to our original motion, which was to table the item with the direction as outlined.
I have an amendment to the motion then, and I would like to ask for a gracious amendment, Chris, to your motion that, and I don't think this is going away by any means, but I make an amendment, at least to the course you guys are taking it, you three, who anything I say, you close your ears, and anyone who has even a 5-mile radius to me, you close your ears. But I make an amendment that you allow these folks to have input on the development agreement.
So is that
they have spent time, money.
Is that a request for an amendment, or is that a substitute motion? Another substitute motion?
An amendment.
So you can ask him to amend his original motion.
To add that they have the right to have they could form a committee and they can come.
And if he does, then he can. If he doesn't, then you can offer a substitute motion, and then we're back to where we were a minute ago. But do you want to amend your motion?
I think implicit in any opportunity to amend a development agreement or any document for that matter is that staff is open and available to entertain and partake of and receive constructive input on making the development agreement better.
Yes.
Whether that comes from council members, whether that comes from internally in staff, or whether that comes from the public. Any and all input and feedback on that is, I think, open and fair game.
Well, the value in encouraging it is that whatever draft comes to us in 2 weeks will be included in our packet, I hope, by a week from tomorrow. And so there's not a whole lot of time to put something together. That being said, that will be in our packet. We'll make it on the website. Everyone who's in attendance will have the opportunity to read it, and will come here and, I suspect and would hope, give their feedback toward the content. So to not solicit any of that feedback, I agree, it would be more than willing to do it. That's what we were elected to do, but it would feel a little more beneficial to do it beforehand instead of just in the live meeting and then trying to amend on the fly. So however you do that, Councilmember Adams' amendment or request was to amend your motion to have, I gather, to have something a little more official. My comment was earlier was something official might be difficult at this stage, but staff could do their best to receive, or Councilmember Page could do their best to receive and interject those. And we're still going to talk about it anyway. We're still going to talk about it in 2 weeks, and we're still going to talk about it for a long time. In 2 weeks, something tells me. Sorry, I don't mean to set a low expectation. So yeah. So would you like to amend your motion at all, or do you think that's
Sure. I mean, I'll amend the motion to include welcoming of all feedback for the improvement of the development agreement and adding additional perspectives to it. I have no problem with that.
The amendment was to have a committee.
I don't believe, I mean, within the next week,
straight.
I don't believe a committee is, they are obviously already organized to a certain degree, so if they need to, that's fine. I don't know that they need to form a committee. They are welcome to provide any kind of feedback they can, whether that's via email, via phone call, show up here to talk to Mr. Thompson, or to any one of us during the course of the next week prior to the...
So your amendment is not to include specifically a direction to form a committee. It's an amendment to receive feedback, but not a committee, correct?
Mine is not. Mine is specifically...
I know, but you're asking him to...
We organize committees all the time.
Sorry, point of order.
Business.
Councilmember Snell is the motion maker,
Well,
and
he asked me
I am the
motion-
second. So
what my amendment was.
Okay.
The amendment.
Yeah, I'm not going to amend it to form a committee in the next week, because I just don't think that's necessary to do.
Well, as the second, if I could just make a comment, I don't think it's the council's role to give direction to private citizens to form a committee or do anything else. They can certainly form a committee, but because it's 2 weeks away, they may just organize and do it more efficiently. I don't know what's involved. I don't know what the difference is between sharing emails and talking amongst themselves and offering advice and forming a committee. So I don't know that we need to give them that direction. But as far as this, I actually thought, and I probably missed it, but in the earlier conversation to the motion, I thought we were already encouraging, and I think it's a good idea, even though, of course, citizens are always welcome to make whatever comment they want. I think in this case, it would be good to give specific direction that we're soliciting and would appreciate and would like and would gain and be enlightened by that input. So as a second, I would be happy to, agree to that. I thought it was already in the motion.
I just want to clear
That's why I say I
that-
think it was
that-
implicit.
That goes without saying, that they can email us all they want, talking about them having an active role in this, okay? A very active role validated by us, because it's fine.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second as outlined, an amended motion and second as outlined, so now we'll call for a vote. Councilmember Garn?
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries 3-2. Thank you, everyone, for spending your evening with us. Next on our agenda is council member reports. Do you have any brief reports that the council would like to share? Next item on our agenda then is minutes. You have before you a set of minutes. Do we have minutes?
Yeah.
Dated June 6, 2017. If you've had a chance to review it, welcome motion for their approval.
I've read these, Mayor, and I would make the motion to approve the minutes.
I'll
June
second.
6th.
Thank you. Motion by Councilmember Schnell, second by Councilmember Page. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. You have next, you also have before you a 3-month calendar. Welcome, give you the opportunity to review that calendar on your own time. The next item on our agenda is a closed session to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property pursuant to Utah Code 52204. There are only a few times in city council meetings that we can adjourn into an executive session and excuse the public. This is one of those times that we are planning to do that. So I'd welcome a motion to move an executive session after a brief break, 5-minute break, convene at 10:25.
Sounds good.
I'll move that we adjourn into an executive session after a brief 8-minute break.
I'll second that.
Thank you. A motion and a second to move into it after, I feel like if I talk just a little slower, it'll actually be 8 minutes, because right now it's 9. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?